Hello and welcome to A-Team Group's Data Management Summit Virtual 2021. We'd like to thank our platinum sponsors, SIX, Bureau van Dijk, QSIP Global Services and Tableau, our gold sponsors, Alatus, the Association of National Numbering Agencies, Solidatus, Albio, Didactics, Hybera, the Derivative Service Bureau, West Highland Support Services and Quantexa. Also our media and industry partners. You can connect with your peers on the networking page, and if you have questions for our speakers, please use the question panel to the right of the video. Thank you for attending and enjoy the summit.
Hello everybody and welcome to A-Team's Data Management Summit Virtual Edition in April 2021. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Andrew Delaney. I am President and Chief Content Officer for A-Team Group, and I'll be your host for today's session. Today's theme is all about leveraging data strategy to support business value creation, data science, and ESG. So quite a lot on the value creation side, probably the first time this particular conference hasn't had a regulatory focus for some years. So we'll be looking at perhaps the more sort of positive aspects of data management, and we'll be exploring this theme with the help, as usual, of some great data management experts from across the industry. So thanks to all of our speakers for supporting this event. Thanks also to our sponsors. Platinum sponsors today are from Bureau van Dijk, QSIP Global Services, SIX, Tableau. Gold sponsors, Anna, Alveo, Alatus, Derivative Service Bureau, Ivera, Solidatus, Quantexa, and West Highland. I mention these because without their support, these events would not be possible. So please do take the time to visit the networking area and the sponsors section, connect with some sponsors, find out how they can help you. That makes them happy, and they'll be happy to sponsor more events like this one, and you get to hear all this great free content. By the way, through our platform, you can also see who else is attending, and you can net with your peers and colleagues. So there's a few things you can do while you're watching today's show, as it were. Hot off the press for today is that the A-Team Entity Data Handbook is available now, and that is a downloadable resource and can be accessed in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. And I think finally from me, we would like to encourage you to get involved by voting in audience poll questions. We have a few polls for you today. And you can use the Slido function, should be there on the right of the video as you look at me. You can also use Slido to ask questions. Those questions will come to me and I will ask them of our panelists and presenters as I see fit. So that's it from me for a minute. As I say, welcome to today's event. We've got a great agenda. Let me, before we move on to that agenda, let's take a very short commercial break. Great, thank you and welcome back. So let's move on and hear from Deb Lorenzen, Managing Director and Head of Enterprise Data Governance at State Street. Hi, Deb, and welcome.
Hi, Andrew.
Great to see you. Seems like a long time ago, that lunch in Boston.
Indeed.
Actually, about a year ago, actually, as it goes. Who knows? You never know where things are going to take you. Anyway, Deb's going to talk to us today about aligning data and business strategy to drive productivity, AI, and revenue optimization. She's responsible for enterprise data governance globally at State Street. You may have heard of State Street. They're quite a large organization, 2.9 billion in revenue, 3.5 trillion in assets under management, and 38.8 trillion in assets under custody. Quite a lot of data to manage there. Deb also sits on the board of directors at Stearns Bank, based in St. Cloud, Minnesota, which provides perspective on retail and small business markets in the US. In her spare time, Deb teaches a course on executing strategic change at Providence College, part of their MBA program. So spare time, you look at data. I'm going to hand over to you, Deb. Welcome and thank you.
Lovely. Thank you, Andrew. Thanks for the warm welcome and thanks for inviting me to talk today. Thanks also to Lorna. So, hi, everyone, and welcome to our discussion on aligning data and business strategy. So, what if I could predict the next operational error leading to loss at a major financial institution? Do you think that that would get the attention of the business? What if we could predict regrettable turnover of IT developers by product? Any EVPs interested in that? Answers to these kind of questions can drive productivity and help optimize your revenue. So today we're going to talk about how to get questions like these back onto the agenda. 10 years ago in financial services, the conversation was all about these kind of predictive questions. All about what we were going to do once we got all of our data into the one cool new data store that was going to have everything in one place finally, so we could run business questions against the data. Turns out, as we all know, it was harder than that. And while we were building the data store, the data quadrupled. Then having a master data management strategy was better than the data store. So someone started building that, and then the data grew tenfold. So someone thought we needed a MART or some MARTs. So we got some of those and we put all of our data there. Well, we didn't get all of our data there, just the regulatory data. But the client data was in another MART. But then they had an epiphany and they decided to convert their MART to a lake in a cloud. And this, my friends, had to be the answer. But then it was a multi-cloud environment because the guy with the regulatory MARTs also wanted his own cloud. And he's moving to a lake too, but it's not the same lake or the same cloud. So then the answer became snowflakes. And somewhere in all of that activity and change, the focus on tools took over from the focus on business outcomes. Driving productivity and revenue optimization by strengthening your data strategy alongside your business strategy can move an organization to a place where prediction, those original questions, can start seeping back into the conversation. And we need to do it, or we'll end up with a bunch of amazing tools that are not solving the needs of our clients. Let's start the discussion with the polling question. So as Andrew mentioned, we invite you to vote using Slido, which is on the right-hand side of your video box. Select polls and then cast your vote. So the first question out there, in your conversations around data strategy or data management in your firm, what percentage of the conversations are focused around tools versus business outcomes? Is it 75% tools, clouds and MARTs and all that? Is it 50-50 tools and business? Or is it 75% plus business outcomes? I invite you to go ahead and vote now. The A team is going to post those results on Slido and I'll just keep going. If any of you out there are listening have children or grandchildren in the right range of the film Frozen 2, you'll remember the darkest point. Anna is on her own. Elsa, her powerful sister, is apparently dead, as is the snowman Olaf. Anna left her fiance Christoph behind, and she's all alone in a cave facing insurmountable odds. As a business person trying to drive data strategy in 2021, there are days when you might feel just like Anna, but there is hope. And we will need to be like Anna, whose next step is to just do the next right thing. So in the Disney movie, that means that Anna breaks out into song, and then she gets a bunch of rock giants to throw some stones at a massive dam and wreck it, and then she completely floods a huge valley. I'm not advocating throwing actual stones, although if your firm needs to turn, you just might need to throw some proverbial ones. What we need to just do the right thing is to drive home our data strategy, even though when you're in the cave and Olaf is melted, it doesn't feel like it's going to be enough. Documenting a firm-wide data strategy and effectively governing your data, which includes AI, ML, clouds, all the tools you need to get that done, is the next right thing. It'll allow us to get our data in order so we can drive insights and ultimately get back to those predictive questions. So what does that mean? It means I need a few things. One, I need an operational model which supports the focus on data and includes institutionalized support from executive management all the way through the line with assigned roles which are not off the side of my desk jobs, but full-time positions with the responsibility and authority to be successful. That was kind of a mouthful. It's worth repeating some of it again. Institutionalized support from executive management, full-time positions, responsibility and authority to be successful. Second, I need a data architecture based on what data the business needs to be successful, including governance, people and process, and organized by data domain. And third, I need a technology architecture, meaning I need a way to operationalize the desired data architecture, including governance, architectural review, SDLC, agile frameworks, so there is a way in the firm and not 16 ways. There are plenty of consulting decks written on what to include in data strategy and how to write one up. Mostly, it's just what's in your business and technology documents, but with a pivot to data lens. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the underlying contents of that data strategy here. But for comparisons, let me throw out another polling question. If a data strategy is an op model with both data and technology architecture, those three things, and you were to classify your firm from a data strategy perspective, where would you say you were? One, it makes sense to have a data strategy, and I really think I should get one. Two, we have components of a data strategy, some data governance, agreements on quality standards and SLAs, but it isn't pulled together as one clear directive. Or three, we have a written data strategy for the firm, which is prioritized, has executive level support, and an appropriate level of funding. I'll continue on while they post the results to that. One other point to press on with the business data architecture, as it's personally a pet peeve, is about organizing data by domain, meaning organizing the housing of like data together, regardless of how many times and places it has to be used across your firm. It seems so obvious, but unfortunately, still not the case, given that the data element is housed one time in a real, actual, singular, accessible golden source, so it can be used wherever appropriately across products and other uses. Take account number, for example. I do understand the complexity that account number is different sizes and shapes across the product lines for the same customer. For example, credit card numbers and current account numbers don't look the same. But having one container for that set of IDs with the Rosetta Stone that maps back to a singular tax ID number should be attainable in 2021, should. In the places where we're not there yet with singular housing, it only pulls us down with layers of technology costs, data quality challenges, and timeliness issues when solving client and regulatory inquiries. Another polling question, keep you busy today, based on my own curiosity. So here's the question. My firm's data is organized around domain. Answer one, all of our data is organized by domain, and I have the ability to blend data across domains at will. Two, our data is largely organized by domain, but the ability to blend data across domains takes a lot of effort. Or three, we're working towards organization by domain and ensuring that the basics of housing and lineage tracking are all in one place. In financial services, everything we do is done with an awareness of regulators. Andrew said we're not going to talk about regulators today, but of course, they naturally stick their heads in here. In the current environment, regulators globally are taking a sincere interest in data and data strategy. The Fed is taking classes from the EDM Council. The ECB is asking probing questions about data roles and responsibilities and coming as close as I've seen to telling banks to appoint people to specific roles like chief data officer and on around the world with the rest of the regulators. As financial institutions, we have to remember that we don't need to write a data strategy for the regulators. If that's the chief driver in your firm, you should pull back and ponder that. The only reason that the regulators are sniffing around the data space is because it's a new lens on our business, because bad data has impacted clients, or because it's clear some of us don't have our act together when it comes to managing our data. Don't get me wrong, it's imperative that we have an agreed approach to data in our respective firms, a data strategy. But if we're doing it just for the regulators, it's dead on arrival. And as soon as the next cool topic comes along, your data strategy is going to end up forgotten or in the bin. Some, I suspect, will use the regulatory card to drive prioritization and the respective funding. Fair enough. But just push back from that statement for a moment. As a business, anyone in the financial markets who doesn't believe taking care of our data and ensuring data quality goes to the clients and shareholders is a key component of their business strategy and therefore needs a regulatory requirement to do the next right thing will not be in business for the long run. Ensuring your executive team supports a data-driven culture and that it's not just a regulatory project is imperative. And if you can't convince them that, and you work in data, it might be time to consider other options. Next polling question. Given what I just said, what's the biggest driver in your organization for data-centric thinking? Is it regulatory? Is it efficiency, cost savings? Is it product development, client demand, or innovation? See, now nobody's going to pick regulatory given what I just said, but be honest in your polling responses. When it comes to data-centric thinking, there is a set of steps most firms will work up to on the road to nirvana, right? To start with, having effectively governed data in any given area gives us the opportunity to run statistics, to answer SLAs, to do month-by-month comparisons so that we better understand our productivity. For most of us, check. Understanding data in any given area gives us metrics, and we have learned to live and die by our metrics. So again, check. Understanding metrics has driven productivity gains and helps us learn about our business and our customers. It's all good up to now, right? Most of this data and metrics and productivity gains so far is organized product by product. If you're an asset manager running both mutual funds and separate accounts, or a retail bank running credit cards and savings accounts, it can be hard, even today, to combine the metrics across products. The real holy grail, and the one that I think has gotten lost in the noise of tools like lakes and multi-clouds and AI and machine learning, as well as regulatory pressure, is the insight we could get if we layered data sets, especially those that don't naturally get combined. We need to cross product lines and step out of our silos. Part of that is turning the focus back from tools to business outcomes. Business outcomes firm-wide, not just within product areas. We also need to include all of our data in the discussion, not just the standardized data. Since we haven't talked unstructured yet, just a quick question for you about unstructured data. So back to the poll in Slido. My firm has a fully integrated approach to unstructured data. Do you totally agree with that statement? Do you agree? Not so much? Or what is unstructured data? So unstructured data, whether it's satellite pictures of Walmart parking lots, which are used in asset management decision-making, or customer comments being collated into net promoter scores in marketing, is a problem still waiting to be solved in many financial institutions. My remarks today hold just as true for unstructured data as for structured, even if this data comes into compliance with your data strategy later than some of the rest. Back to layering data sets. What do I mean by this? What if, for example, I could combine my operational errors resulting in loss with my employee survey results by frontline manager and HR data like turnover. These three data sets, operational errors, employee turnover, and engagement survey results, almost never come into contact with each other, either because the HR data is so completely secret squirrel that the most senior executives get to see it only. The operational loss data is also under lock and key, lest the customers and regulators find out, which they do actually already know, that sometimes we have operational losses. And the employee survey results, when they're done, are kept in some third-party app, which can only be accessed by charting the stars and pirouetting 3 times for the right HR staffer, if you can find her. But what if? And now we're back to predictive. What if the insights we could get from running those 3 data sets together showed us that there was a correlation between employee engagement scores and operational errors, and that the correlation was tightest in stable, meaning low average turnover, onshore teams, even though everybody was sure that the errors were coming from some newly created and less experienced offshore team? What could we do with that insight? Take another combination. What if you could take IT development dollars as a percentage of production code and run it against employee turnover and product status, meaning star, cash cow, problem child? If your product suite is relatively wide, this could pop out those stars who are being underfunded and help explain the employee exodus that's happening because they realized before you did that the product was being starved. These questions, where's my next operational loss going to happen? And am I focused on my limited development dollars on the right set of products and others like them, are the actual job to be done? So what's holding us back? It sounds too simple to say, but I believe it's true that what's holding us back across the industry is a lack of clear data strategy with the op model, business and technology data architecture, and then the discipline to pull off a multi-year, multi-million-dollar change program that doesn't obviously lead to improved margin in any specific product team. There are so many business-related questions we could posit if we just shake ourselves out of the current malaise where some combo of cool new IT kit, which requires transformation and thus distracts us, regulatory angst, which requires focused attention and thus distracts us, and the getting the fundamentals right, which is boring and takes time and thus distracts us. So here's my 3-part prescription for lifting us back up again. First, you need to go back and remind yourself what questions you should be trying to answer, and they don't have anything to do with which provider or providers you should pick, or which MDM or MART is going to work best. Next, you need a solid data strategy, including effectively governed data across all data domains, allowing you to manage the data in an ordered way, while still giving the opportunity to cross the data sets where and when you want. Tools will matter a great deal when it comes to attaining your business objectives, but tools are not the business objectives. Lastly, you need an executive leadership which supports the problems you're trying to solve with a data-driven culture and will therefore afford the appropriate level of prioritization and funding. So it's simple, right? What you need are knowing the business problems you're trying to solve, you need a data strategy, executive support, and funding. Get that, and we'll finally get back to predictive. Last polling question for the day. How many times in the past year did you have a real conversation in your firm about predictive? 1, we have a data science team who focuses on predictive as well as other data analysis. 2, we discuss predictive, but it's not yet a practical reality. Or 3, our focus is on foundational activities, which could one day get us to a discussion of predictive. Thank you for your time today. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Andrew?
Deb, thanks so much. Little harsh on the regulatory get out of jail free card, I thought, but really provocative, let's just say. Look, we've got time for one question from the audience, and you actually just there answered the most popular one that came up, which was to give some insight into how to formulate a data strategy. But here's a second question for you, which is sort of the next step, if you like. What techniques have you found effective for getting business buy-in for having a data strategy, given that you don't think that regulatory is the way to go?
Yeah. I think that you have to hit it with every tool in your toolkit, as they say. So regulatory is a component of that, right? You can get prioritization and funding through regulatory, there's no question. You can get prioritization and funding by showing the business what the advantages are. And that's every POC that you could imagine. If I could show you, take a small example, take one product that has a small enough set of data compared to the rest of it that you can actually get through and show the results for that. And then walk around and show those results, cross the data sets in a small corner of the world and show folks how you do it. I think that we have to show people, I think going in, and especially as head of data governance, when I go in and talk about data governance, the first response from the business, and I came from the business, is that I'm another tax, right? I'm another thing that they have to deal with that keeps them from going and getting their business done. But if I can show them an example of how what we can do can provide business value and help them sell more stuff and make more money, then I've got their attention. But you got to show, you can't tell.
Yeah, no, great. Excellent. Thanks. That's great insight, great guidance. Love the use of Slido, kept everyone on their toes for the first session, always a good thing. Thanks so much, Deb, for joining us today.
Pleasure, Andrew.
Look forward to getting another lunch in next time in Boston, hopefully in the not distant future. Thank you.
Cheers.
Okay, let's move on to the next session. We have a panel. We're going to be looking at establishing a strong data management foundation for trusted and connected data to drive data science and AI. I'm going to hand over now to the moderator for that session. It's Naresh Raja of Grant Thornton. I can see Naresh there. Hi, Naresh. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Andrew.
Great to see you. Naresh has over 20 years of experience focused on data, regulation, automation, innovation and transformation. Lots of Asians there. He's a member of our advisory board for our the Data Management Insight, which means he helps put together the agendas for conferences like this. He is Managing Director and Head of Data, Regulatory Change and RegTech Practice at Grant Thornton. So with that, I'm going to hand over to you, Naresh.
Thank you, Andrew. And hello, everybody, and welcome to our next session, which is really today about establishing a strong data management foundation for trusted and connected drive into data science and AI. We have a fantastic set of panelists who are going to share their experience with you, and I'll ask them to introduce them in a minute or so. Please do keep the questions coming in. So there's a box for questions, and you can ask us any questions as we go through. We'd like to keep this as interactive as possible. Please do also log into Slido. We have our polls that we would like to share with us, and therefore please do keep contributing via Slido. But we're looking forward to a really interesting panel discussion now in terms of this exciting topic. But I'm going to ask for a brief introduction from my fellow panelists. So Malvika, I don't know whether you can give a short, brief introduction about yourself, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm Malavika Solanki. I'm a member of the management team at the Derivative Service Bureau, which issues OTC ISINs and CFI codes and shortly UPI codes. My responsibilities are to lead the stakeholder engagement aspects, but also to oversee strategic service development.
Perfect. Thank you, Malvika. Could I ask Stan to go next, perhaps, and give an intro?
Hello. Yes. Good day. Stan O'Mara. Recently joined Invesco in the newly created role of Investment Data Officer. So building out an investment domain data capability and as part of a wider enterprise data strategy. Been in financial services longer than vanity will allow me to disclose, but been directly involved with data management and governance for the last 15 years and served as CDO of a couple of various investment shops.
Perfect. Thank you, Stan. Robert, would you like to go next?
Sure. Thanks, Naresh. Robert Wallace. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer for West Highland Support Services. We are a global market data consulting organization focused on managing trading and real-time market data services, along with managing reference, fundamental data, and other data sets that are used in the broker-dealer community. My background before joining West Highland, I held roles of global head of market data architecture at Citigroup and chief technologist for the financial services vertical at Hewlett Packard Enterprise.
Perfect. Thank you, Robert. And last but by no means least, Kieran, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks, Naresh. Hello, everyone. Kieran Seward here. I look after sales, partnerships, and account management at the Tactics, which the lovely readership at Data Management Insight have voted as the best data quality analysis tool for the past 2 years running. And in my responses today, I'll be bringing and sharing insights and experience from our client firms, as much as my own knowledge, which I've generated over the past 10 years working in this space.
Perfect. So thank you, panelists. And as the audience can tell, we've pulled together some kind of fantastic leaders in the space of data to share their views today. I'm going to start with probably asking the audience to really participate first of all. And there's a poll question on Slido. What is the biggest challenge you face in establishing a strong data management foundation which creates true value in your organization? And there are, it's a multiple choice question, and most of you who've taken multiple choice exams in the past probably can identify. It goes from improving data quality, improving data culture, poor data quality, advancing the data governance framework, improving business ownership and accountability for data, and then modernizing legacy architectures and technologies. Unlike multiple choice questions that we might have faced in the past, there's no right or wrong answer. Please do contribute, and then it allows us to really start to have a good conversation going. Okay, we're going to wait for that to come in terms of the results, but please do, let's actually just wait a second. I'm going to start with the first question to our panelists whilst that's coming in. That gives the audience time to kind of fill out their question, fill out the answers. So business users are reliant on high quality data to generate insights. And it's great to hear some of the panelists have good experience in data. How can we trust the quality of data, and how are you building confidence in the quality of data? So maybe I can ask Malvika probably to start with that question.
Certainly, one of the things that we focus on with the marketplace in general, because we, whether it's the buy side or the sell side, look at very closely, is trying to make sure that when data is used, there is consistency around what the data elements are and clear understanding around what the items are, how they're supposed to be used, and how they're defined. And that really sets the grail for a lot of this stuff. Because if you want consistency in the if you can apply the data, a rule set consistently for a certain set of data, it is likely to then improve downstream any subsequent utilization. And the other big item around this is also to look at provenance. Where is that data coming from? How comfortable are you that it's noise-free, if that is what you need? And if it's not noise-free, making sure that you're applying the right systems and tools to capture the value from that noise as you need it, if that is what you're looking for. So certainly I would say provenance and consistency, and really focusing on making sure that those elements form the foundations. Perfect.
Thank you, Malvika. That's kind of some insightful content there. And then Stan, I don't know whether you want to add to that from Malvika, or do you have an opposing view?
No, not an opposing view, just to really amplify. Just to my mind, the key is really about the governance. And when I think governance, I know oftentimes we think about tools. There's a number of vendors selling tools in the space. They're handy, they're tools for the process, but it's not the process. It is not unto itself governance. And I think we get lost there sometimes. I think the real key of net governance is that communication. So what are the tools telling us? How are we defining our, having those discussions around what are our use cases? What are the definitions? Something as simple as what does good look like? Oftentimes we don't know. It's a question you can ask and you get a lot of puzzled looks. If you can't answer that question, if you don't have a discussion around that, it's really hard to continue the discussion into, how do we effectively use those tools to promote that quality? And to do that, the stakeholders really need to be part of the process. This is not a technology initiative. This needs to be driven by the business, by users, to develop those standards, to develop the KPIs, the metrics around that, and to really be part of assessing that on an ongoing basis. So it does need that commitment to it. We need to get the right stakeholders involved. And again, that's regular engagement, having that conversation, having that consistent, steady feedback so we know where we are. When there are issues, it shouldn't be a surprise to anybody who's in that governance process or part of that data usage and stewardship community.
Perfect, Stan. That's helpful. And then, Kieran, maybe slightly differently in terms of one of the things we've talked in the question is about building trust. Could you maybe expand on that part of the question?
Sure, and I agree with what Stan says. The tool is only part of the solution, to the problem. Yeah, certainly in terms of building trust or confidence in the data, I would say, measure it from the bottom up and use industry standard data quality metrics. And in doing so, and as Stan says, involve all of the data stewards and the subject matter experts from the various lines of business in the process for two reasons. Number one, they'll provide the business context, an understanding of that data to help you define the rules to measure that data.
Sure.
They also come along as part of the journey and fully understand the reasons for doing this, and will hopefully, fully buy into the process. Once you have that measurement in place, you can then start to publish, provide your business users with a live picture of the quality of their data via dashboarding, again building confidence. And some of our clients have gone even further than that and empowering those business users or data stewards to actually correct the data for which they're responsible. Of course, all of this takes a lot of time and effort and thought process going into it and buy-in from various stakeholders, but it does work in building confidence at all levels of the organization.
Perfect. Kieran, that's really helpful. Thank you. I'm just going to maybe ask us to look at the poll results, which are quite interesting, that have come back, which is really around the question that we asked in terms of the challenge around establishing strong data management. I'm going to move us along quite quickly, but could I have maybe perhaps a quick view from Kieran and Robert in terms of what their response to the audience answers are? Do you have any thoughts in terms of, is that what you were expecting? Is something
Sure.
completely surprised you?
That doesn't surprise me. I think as organizations continue to embrace new technologies and demand new data sets, the business ownership of the data has to be of paramount importance. I think one of the fastest growing technical areas in large organizations is this concept of citizen developer, where business users are working with technologists and developers to optimize and automate workflows based on these new data sets that have to be curated at the business level.
Perfect. I'm going to ask Kieran to kind of keep his powder dry for the next question, actually, given the danger of having fantastic panelists. They have a lot to say and we've got a lot to get through in 25 minutes. So let me go to the second question. What is the importance of data lineage as well as kind of new tools in terms of data governance, data catalogs, business glossaries, data taxonomies, and how can these tools be deployed for the benefit of data lineage? So probably going to ask Stan for a brief answer, if I may, on that.
Sure, brief answer, huh? Yeah, no, I think the importance of the data lineage can't be overemphasized. Just continuing on the discussion about having that communication, knowing what the uses are, knowing who the stewards are, really, and getting back to Malvika's point, the provenance of that data. Don't use something unless you know where it's from. And I think that lineage is hugely important to understand the provenance, help you understand the quality, but also as part of the governance process to understand what are downstream impacts. If I'm going to make a change upstream, who am I going to impact? before I make that change. So really embedding that into the entirety of the change management and governance process. So I have that good view. I know what I'm going to break before I break it. I know who I'm going to impact. Who do I bring into that conversation and that working group before I start making changes that may or may not be appropriate?
Perfect. Stan, that's fantastic. Thank you. And Malvika, maybe a short summary from you in terms of, do you have a opposing view in terms of lineage, or do you agree with Stan?
I would probably like to build on what Stan said. It's not so much an opposing view. It's taking that almost adding a different dimension to it, which is really looking at, so if you're really going to say, everything we've talked about so far has been about trying to get those pieces in place. Once you have them in place, though, it's incredibly important in my experience to make sure that you also build systems in place for the evolution, because your business is going to change. And the data you keep has, if you're relying on standards, those standards need to evolve. If you're creating stewardship groups, which are incredibly important, you need to make sure that you have not just the cross-functional pieces that Kieran was talking about and that Stan mentioned, but also you need to have people from front to back in your business chain. Because for something, we're talking very specifically. If you say, okay, how do you define a tenor? Ask 10 different people, I promise you, you'll get 12 different answers, depending on where in the organization they sit. And that sounds trivial, but it's something all of us know from a trading perspective, right? However, what you need to make sure is you have the right people in the room. You've got from front to back representation, but you're also looking at setting up systems and processes that allow the communication and information exchange as your business evolves.
Perfect. Malvika, that's great. Look, we've got a range of questions coming in from the audience, which is always great. So I'm probably going to pick one of them, and so it would be great if the panel can speak their thoughts on a few minutes on workable data strategy. So if I decipher that, I think it's, what is a point of view on a workable data strategy? And data strategy is obviously a document that created by organizations. Does the panel really feel that that can be executed in the right way? So I'm probably going to ask maybe one of you to give a quick short answer to that question, and then we'll move on. Any volunteers at all that want to answer that question?
I could jump in a little bit.
Perfect.
And not overly complex. It may be very basic, but don't be too aspirational. As you're looking at this, as you're laying out your journey, don't let. I'm always concerned that perfection becomes the enemy of the good. Typically, it's a good idea to maybe define a roadmap. You know where you want to get to, but don't overextend yourself. Do something, make it in small pieces so you can show value, you can demonstrate value to the business, because you need them to continue to come back and help with that process. Getting back to the poll question, you want to keep them engaged. So the more you can do, show that incremental benefit, I think it's going to be to your to the benefit of the overall program.
Perfect, Stan. Thank you so much. And I hope the person who asked that question found that valuable. I certainly did. Thank you, Stan. We're just going to move on to a different question now. What are the challenges of unstructured and alternative data sets? And how can they be integrated into a data platform which is beneficial for the business? So I'm probably going to ask Kieran perhaps to answer this question.
Sure. I'm going to use an example we're coming across in the firms in the alternative investment space, such as private equity and hedge funds. They absolutely rely on alternative data as the basis of some of their research, and they need to enrich, their standardized internal data with alternative data sources. An example is getting an accurate picture of unlisted firms by utilizing, company registration office data, such as UK Companies House, or vendor sources such as PitchBook or Crunchbase. The issue there is there's no common identifier exists, so you have to match or map that data by different means. And we're finding that those type of firms who are very technically skilled firms, this is still proving a major challenge. And in our experience, a sort of centralized approach to that standardization, rather than data scientists in different areas of the business doing their own thing, enables or ensures a more harmonized view across the enterprise.
Perfect. Thank you, Kieran. Just, I suppose, moving on, and I think cloud has become quite an important part of the kind of strategy organizations are following. So with the migration to cloud-based tools and technologies, what are the challenges of migrating data, do we feel, specifically in cloud, to the cloud, and how can these be resolved? So Robert, I don't know whether you want to give a view from your perspective.
Sure. So first off, I think that most large banks have a multi-cloud, and the way I would call it a hybrid cloud approach, right? They'll never be 100% in any one public cloud, and the challenges of managing data across those multi-clouds is that data sets become or have the tendency to become much more distributed. As users and businesses take advantage of cloud technologies, they move data sets to leverage different tools that are available in different on different cloud platforms. This creates obviously data lineage and ownership and compliance challenges. From a compliance perspective, things like GDPR come into question and have to be managed very robustly. And this, I think, this goes back to the comments that have been made previously, in that people have to, the business has to become data stewards of this content, because the velocity of change and the residency of the data is now needs to be known all the time, right? You need to be able to provide regulatory reporting in any region you do business in, and you need to control that content, and in some cases purge it from the system based on legal requirements. Security also becomes a concern there, just as one of the reasons people move to the public cloud, it usually starts with a cost reduction play to get out of data centers, but very quickly people start taking advantage of the next generation tools within that environment, and very quickly outstrips your governance approach if you're not taking a holistic view and getting all the stakeholders involved in governance of the content.
Really helpful, Robert. Malvika, do you have anything to add from your perspective?
Oh,
can't hear you at the moment. Oh, there we go.
Hopefully that helps. Right. So two aspects to that. One is, so on the cybersecurity one, that's absolutely imperative, and really for two reasons. One, because you need to be secure in any case, and the nature of the threats are continually evolving. But two, depending upon which jurisdiction your data is in and where you are operating, the range of standards to which you need to adhere to can also vary. So you also have to make sure that you're keeping that in mind as part of your cost of doing business. And the other thing to think about is also, to Robert's point, because most people are evolving towards this hybrid cloud approach. It used to be called multi-cloud, you're right, it's that hybrid approach. It becomes incredibly important that from a consumer perspective, you're also conducting regular supplier risk assessments. And that you're asking not just the questions that are obvious, but also the questions that are specific to your business and the risks that might pose to your business.
Perfect, Malvika. Thank you for that. I suppose the kind of one final question from me, and I'd like all of you to contribute to that, because it's crucial, I think critical to this topic, is as data science and AI becomes more embedded, how are you supporting the development of data literacy and data capabilities across your business? And can you share specific examples, tangible examples? So perhaps I'll start with Stan, please, if that's okay.
Yeah, no, sounds good. Yeah, I find that one of the challenges around applying data science and AI is that oftentimes the practitioners, come into the field with fairly, I'll call it generic skills. They understand the tools, they understand the capabilities. They're not so much experts on the domains that they're being asked to work with. And countering that with, sometimes the business folks are a little leery of this skill set being brought in. So, I think a lot of the challenges is really convincing those business folks that this is to their benefit. This can't be done without their expertise, and to really partner them up with these practitioners to make sure that you have the benefit of their experience as you build out these capabilities, because we really need to have that domain lens on it. And part of that, even besides specifically partnering up, but things like informal programs, brown bag sessions, just to really try to teach the domain to these practitioners, I think helps and allows them to build better product going forward.
Thank you, Stan. Kieran, do you have a view?
Well, I don't have a view internally at the tactics, but perhaps I can share, my experience with our client firm. So, at the tactics, we've seen the full spectrum of data literacy or data maturity, both within financial services subsectors and in other industries. And you can go from one tier one bank to the next, and there'll be a complete difference in understanding of their data and the data literacy of the practitioners within that business. And then in other industries, we also work in public sector. They're starting from scratch, so that requires buy-in from the absolute top level. Someone asked a question earlier about workable data strategies. The fact that there's a strategy in place is a positive thing.
Sure.
And just last week, one of our clients had a data quality awareness week across the business, to give you an example.
Perfect. That's really helpful, Kieran. And then Malvika, do you have a view?
So on this, I think it comes at this from two perspectives. One is this idea of making sure that you're getting the domain expertise to the data people that Stan touched on, but actually taking that a step further, because with that, in my experience, it's incredibly important to know, to make sure that the domain expertise is provided from multiple perspectives. Because oftentimes what you don't want is one person, or with one view, basically speaking to a group of experts, because that ends up being taken as gospel. And there's nothing wrong with that. But the whole point of data, we know, is if you need to make sure your rule sets around these pieces take in lots of different perspectives so that you get the best from it on the output side. So you need to make sure that even as you're providing that experience, it's coming from multiple perspectives, maybe in instances where people don't necessarily share the same opinions. Not because people are wrong, but that diversity of perspective can make an absolute difference at a number of different levels. And then the other one really is around, because that to me is more around the capabilities piece, but the data literacy aspect is in my mind around almost communicating back with the business and having that ongoing dialogue between the people that consume the data and the people that are creating it, to make sure that there's continually a parity between the way they're looking at this thing as they continue to use it over time.
Perfect. We've got a raft of questions coming in, so I'm going to from the audience. So, Robert, if you don't mind, last but not least, very, very briefly on that, on the last question that we've just talked about in terms of data science and embedding that for data literacy.
Yeah, I think one of the most important, and I agree with what everybody says. I just to add in a kind of slight addition to it is inbound data management. I think is becoming more and more essential to getting to productivity, getting as much productivity out of your data scientists and your end users. And firms need to leverage tools like robotic process automation to manage kind of inbound unstructured content and data from and content from many sources, along with AI for curating the data. At West Highland, we use AI significantly for our legal entity mastering process, and which would be impossible to do with current staff levels unless we were leveraging these next generation tools.
Fantastic. So we've got a raft of questions coming in. So let me just share some of those, and I'm going to pick on one of each of you to answer one of these. So if there are bank accounts and sort code and account numbers that you want to transfer the money to me ahead, I'll make your questions much easier. So or a pint of beer would work just as well. So the first question is how to make the role of data steward attractive to the business people. And I think the role is essential to leverage data strategy and mobilize people. But I think the question is a really good one. Is the term data stewards exist within the organizations? It's this nebulous term. How do you make that attractive to business people so they espouse it work to it, they take the role seriously, and they have the same accountability to make things happen. So I'm going to probably ask Kieran, actually. I don't know whether you have a view on that.
Well, I don't know how to make it attractive to business people, but as I said previously, bringing people in who are business users who are using this data day in, day out, who understand, have that domain expertise. They're often the ones that are bemoaning the quality of that information, the reliability of that information. So empowering them to become, have more responsibility for that information, it becomes more attractive in itself. I don't know whether monetary incentives go on at these organizations, but that always works as well.
And just thank you, Kieran. And in terms of the other, the rest of the panel members, have you deployed any strategies for actually rewarding in some way or recognizing data stewards to actually make it attractive? Is there a practical example one of the panelists can share?
How should we say? I think part of it is just, Kieran spoke to the empowering. I think also establishing, and gets a little more formal here, but establishing a matrix, making sure that it is part of their defined, job function. Oftentimes they're asked to do this. You do this, now be a data steward as well. And it's not fair. And I think it's often helpful to realize that most likely they're doing a lot of these activities anyway. Maybe they're not as formalized, maybe they're not as defined, but to recognize them for that, to matrix in, to allow that to be a aspect of their compensation going forward, I think is one way to make it more attractive to this potential stewards.
Thank you, Stan. Really helpful. Okay, there's another popular question that we have. A lot of firms just keep on moving from one data tool to another every 3 years to 5 years. We've all seen that. And the new big technology that comes along, this just brings rework and in reporting and insights. Does the panel have a thought? So I'm probably going to ask Malvika, maybe perhaps, given her background, and then Robert, just to give you both a bit of warning. So Malvika, do you have a view?
Short answer is yes, definitely have a view. So to me, it really comes down to having some kind of consistency in your strategy, because a tool has to be about delivering on your strategy. And that strategy can't just be, to Stan's earlier point, it can't just be a vision. It has to be something tangible and practical. It's that next layer down. It's how you're going to, it's not just this is where I want to get to, but this is where the firm is trying to go. And then if the tools are focused on supporting that strategy, in my experience, there tends to be less volatility around selection of the tool, because the goal becomes the focus, not the tool to deliver the goal. And it's very easy to think about that, because to me, the tool is a way of enabling the process. If you focus on process at the price of outcome, that can be a dangerous place to be. There has to be a balance.
Perfect. Thank you, Malvika. Totally agree. Robert, do you have a view?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it all has to be tied down to your business, your overall business strategy and your data strategy. I think firms, and I'm not, I have experienced kind of application, a recycling and movements based on contractual changes. I think that firms need to look at it in a much more kind of module perspective, need to make sure that whatever tools they choose have the ability to interface with as many APIs and other platforms as possible, so they don't get locked into a single data provider who can only provide a certain subset of services. So these platforms, they'll never be completely open, but they need to be able to interact with, in some cases, competitors to provide the full class of service to their clients.
Perfect. Thank you so much, panelists. Look, we have some range of great questions coming in. We haven't had the time to answer all of them, so apologies to those questions that have come through from the audience. We just run out of time. Data is such a fantastic subject, and it's such an enthusiastic subject for everybody. But first of all, I'd like to thank my fellow panelists, Malvika, Robert, Kieran and Stan for really sharing some fantastic insights. And then I'd like to hand back to Andrew really to kind of continue the rest of the session. So thank you.
Thank you, Naresh, and thanks to the panel. That was a great session, really enjoyable. I thought it was quite an interesting sort of tone to the questions today. We seem to have accepted that having a data strategy in place is a good thing. And there's not sort of a question about whether they should have one, but really how do we make it workable? What are the practicalities of it? Thought it was a really great session. So thanks everybody. Really enjoyed it. Got a lot of questions there. If you did ask questions in the Slido, we've got a few more opportunities. We may be able to present some of those questions and get them answered later in the session. So anyway, let's move on now. We're just an hour in. If you are joining us, welcome. My name is Andrew Delaney. I'm Chief Content Officer at A-Team Group, and I'm your host for this session. Just to re-emphasize, we are taking questions to panelists and speakers through the Slido, which you should be able to see on your screen there. So if you do have any questions you'd like to ask, then please, those will come to me. They're visible on your Slido, and we keep the conversation going. So let's look. The next session is a presentation on ESG, reaching truth and transparency through data that quantifies the community voice. And we're going to be hearing from Tanya CJ, who is CEO and founder of Orenda Software Solutions. Now, Tanya's background is that she worked as a health and environment reporter for many years. She led an environmental cleanup project and then got involved with a carbon capture and storage research consortium for a government. And she did some research around, for her master's degree, focused on reputational issues, reputation of corporations and the communities they serve. And this led to her founding Orenda. Orenda works with raw data to deliver structured data and analytics to financial markets. And they caught my eye actually a few weeks ago when they were acquired by SIX. So this is quite a sort of cutting edge area of the industry. We're going to do two things now. We're going to hear from Tanya in a pre-recorded video. So she will give us a keynote presentation, and then she's going to be joining us for a Q&A. So I look forward to this format, which is made possible by our brand new conference platform. So I'm going to hand over to Tanya on video, and enough from me.
Thank you, Andrew. And hello, everyone. I'm Tanya CJ, and I'm the CEO of Orenda, a SIX company. So a few words about me. My background is in journalism and corporate communications, two valuable experiences that helped shape Orenda, along with, of course, a wonderful team of brilliant people. We understand how quickly a reputation can be destroyed. So when we started to build Orenda, we wanted the technology to easily manage a few things. The biggest is that when a company behaves well, we wanted to measure reactions to those accomplishments in a quantitative way so that we could quickly understand how that company was performing. And when reaction to corporate behavior was favorable, we wanted scores for Orenda's metrics to rise. And for the opposite to happen, scores would go down if reactions were unfavorable. And of course, this is an important feature because it allows us to take conversations about a company, organize them into any metric we value, and score it so that we can prove that these results are just as important and just as dynamic as a company's stock price. Traditionally, when a company is perceived to do well, the stock price, of course, goes up or falls if it isn't meeting its expectations. This is still true. What's changed is that society decides what doing well means, and society has those expectations. And that is what's impacting the company's bottom line in 2021. That leads us to today. Orenda is a technology that is designed to capture and carve out relevant discussions about a company's environmental, social, and governance activities. SIX recognized Orenda as a way to bridge financial markets to what is clearly a new way of doing business. And we're very fortunate to be here with them today. Our mission, combined mission, is to provide truth and transparency that empower sustainable and ethical investment decisions for financial markets by measuring both the corporation and community voice. To us, that is reaching ESG excellence, to not only understand the company's commitment, but to assess their performance for years to come. Company disclosure, definitely it continues to have an important role in ESG data. However, when it comes to ESG performance, company disclosures have several reported shortcomings. Often the issues or the reported shortcomings are that company disclosures are often incomplete, or the narrative is too generic. The companies disclose measures taken, but not the results. Also, quantitative disclosures are difficult to compare from year to year. Companies also report on different ESG factors using a variety of different frameworks, and we've all seen those. There is no one stop for ESG disclosures currently, especially not a pattern that can be wrapped around the globe. So using social media allows for, number one, a much broader narrative. Number two, it incorporates the results of measures taken. And number three, we can design a framework to organize data that allows for constant change that is not confined to geographical borders, because there are none in social media. And it's also a one-stop shop for ESG content. And you never have to wait when you're using social media. You never have to wait for an annual report or proxy statements, earning calls, or the like. ESG content is available in real time from real people having real conversations. So let's talk about social media and digital empowerment. Using Twitter as a main source of social media content is ideal, and it's ideal for many reasons. Today, this is where society gets their news. And unlike what many think, possibly, the discussions are real. Users are sharing content and discussing critical and often difficult and important topics, such as COVID-19 and Black Lives Matter, which were among the most heavily discussed topics of 2020. Also, Twitter added features for fact-checking in direct response to the US election and conversation control to help create more valuable and possible positive discussions. They suspended close to 1 million accounts in the first half of 2020 due to hateful conduct. This is also working to quickly suppress the spread of fake news at the source. So news from around the world dominates this platform, and it moves at breakneck speed. The majority of these users, about 73%, follow professional journalists. Also, journalists use it often for research and reporting for their own news sourcing. In fact, the heaviest users of Twitter are actually the media industry from around the world, with nearly 25% of Twitter accounts being that of credited journalists. It's also strong in political conversations, with 83% of the world's leaders on Twitter and directly engaged in important and critical topics impacting their communities and their constituents. Again, this is the platform for important, difficult, and critical conversations. This includes conversations about the environment, social rights and wrongs, and governance issues. Just a few more facts about Twitter. About 42% have a college degree and are considered higher earners than those users of other platforms. It's also the #1 social media platform in Japan. And in 2020, the largest audience growth was from Germany. Now for the easy part. How do we compare one company's ESG performance to that of its peers? So let's take a step back and look at ESG when it was created. ESG is meant to drive the investment processes and decisions It's not traditionally part of the financial analysis, not a traditional one. For example, it now has climate change, water management, health and safety. It was first coined in 2005 in the report Who Cares Wins. Ultimately, it has financial relevance because by identifying corporate purpose, leading to strategic management and quality companies. So ESG is serving as a proxy for a change in thinking and for new concepts of valuation. It's being used to identify those companies with a healthy future. And like I said earlier, it's helping to avoid those companies that are likely to fail or underperform. It's big business. Now everyone wants data on a company's commitment to climate change, how it treats its employees and customers, if it's lacking diversity. At Orenda, we extract this data from real conversations in real time, like I said. So our technology is AI-based and allows for better interpretation of non-traditional financial information. And it provides transparency because it uses real conversations from all stakeholders and shareholders. So when companies around the world are being measured using the same patterns of language, the same metrics, and the data is coming from a single source, comparisons are much easier. This allows us to do some very important work, such as what you see on the screen, such as using data sets, including the scores of entire indices, to isolate the most socially aligned and the most valued companies when it comes to ESG performance, no matter where the companies are in the world. So our team has composed several white papers, including a portfolio construction and optimization white paper employing Orenda's ESG dataset. That includes years of historical data. So we're calling this, as you see here, the first ESG efficient frontier. And everyone is welcome to replicate our work. You can find it on our website. The ESG portfolio of stocks does prove that ESG is an important factor for alpha generation and for portfolio optimization. And for companies that fall out of alignment with society's values when compared to their peers, we also have trading strategies for them. I mean, the possibilities are endless. So the world will continue to evolve in this area, and so will we at Orenda. We have some exciting products we are launching at SIX this year, as well as 2022. So I want to thank you for your time today, and I wish you all well. And I'm going to hand this back to Andrew. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Tanya. We have had a number of questions. We've got a bit of time to take a couple of questions to throw at you from Slido. It was very interesting. You mentioned two things about Twitter, actually. One, that only smart people use Twitter, which is nice to hear because I like using Twitter. The other bit was that some people don't trust social media. And the first question is more along those lines. Wouldn't social media data be biased for any measurement? So I presume you've got that one covered at Orenda.
In terms of bias, I guess you're thinking that potentially only negative information comes from Twitter, possibly, if that's what the questions is in regard to. And that's true, there is more negative news that comes from Twitter, but we also see exceptionally especially in the last year or so, much more positive, much more these are the values that I want to see in a company, and you see those conversations being shared more and more and more. You would see that with Black Lives Matter and just really important conversations. I mean, it's not all cat videos, I guess, is what we're trying to say. There's some really important data points in there. The CIA uses it. I mean, there's a lot of organizations that use it for pulling out information that is really, really important.
Very good, thank you. Can you sort of drilling down into what Orenda does and how it does it? How does your technology tell when a corporation has recovered from quote unquote bad behavior?
Yeah, so we've done a number of use cases. A lot of it you'll find on our website, but one of the ones that I think about a lot, and one of our first ones was with Apple as a brand. So among the metrics that we measure for is trust. So this is a really important factor because Apple will come out with a new iPad maybe, but satisfaction could be low, and then it returns quickly. Trust is a separate thing. So when they misbehaved and they lied about slowing down CPUs, you would have seen that drop, that erosion of trust in our data. And it took them a while to recover from that. They had to make a number of moves before you start to see the trust start to increase again for the company. So in a lot of cases, it has to do with the brand itself, whether or not they have enough trust in regular times, so that when there is a crisis event, they're able to recover more quickly. So you see that in our data set.
Very good, thank you. Time for one more quick question. You mentioned AI. Can you tell us a little bit more about what types of AI that you're using? It's certainly approaching not mainstream, but bubbling under, usually within our audience. So they're kind of keen to know more.
Yeah, so I find AI very interesting. When I first started out with Arenda, I used to call it accelerated intelligence versus artificial intelligence. I think that for us, it was a lot about that. So for us, it's a lot of natural language understanding, natural language processing, being able to take right now, being able to have a really expansive AI training data set that we have that goes back 5 years or more, to be able to build out that AI modeling that, and we use a number of different approaches, a bunch of different methodologies, but to get us to the point where we're 99.8% accuracy in terms of what we're doing.
Very good, excellent. Well, that's what we've got time for. Thank you so much, Tanya. Thanks for joining us. Really fascinating project. Looks like you've got some things lined up for later in the year. And congratulations on your transaction with SIX. That must be very exciting for you. Thanks for joining us today.
Again.
Great, thank you. We're going to move right on now. So coming up, we're going to carry on the theme of ESG. We've got a practitioner innovation keynote delivering the data strategy for ESG at NatWest. So it's like a case study. But before we go to that, we're going to have a short commercial break.
We used to think fishing hard was good business.
But with Tableau's data analytics, we're fishing smart.
Now, we rely on this instead of that.
We're leveraging AI, cutting down on fuel consumption, and filling our quotas in half the time. Makes us feel like geniuses.
Tableau lets everyone harmonize in the sweet song of a data culture.
With data analytics, I've managed to trim my chowder cost 22.7%. Those are some savory metrics.
And real-time catch data puts us in the right spot for the right fish at the right time, every time.
That's how we went from Seafood Inc. to Global Sustainable Seafood Inc. Worldwide, unlimited. We've got all hands on data.
All hands on data.
All hands on data.
All hands on data.
All hands on data!
Welcome back. Really great ad there from Tableau. Really appreciate them, their support. We're going to move on now to, as I mentioned before, a case study, if you like, an innovation keynote delivering the data strategy for ESG at NatWest. And I'm joined by Andy Rocco and Sarah Walker. Hello, guys. Welcome.
Hello.
Thanks for joining us today. Looking forward to your presentation. Just to give the audience a bit of background, Sarah is an award-winning data practitioner, having won Data Practitioner of the Year award at our DMI Awards this year. So that's her claim to fame, I would say. Congratulations on that, Sarah. But she's not being an award-winning practitioner. She's actually head of data and analytics for the commercial bank and NatWest Markets. Andy is head of climate data and technology across NatWest Group, looking at identification and sourcing of external data sources and matching these to internal assets, exposures, and customer records. So we're going to hear from you guys today about your activities at NatWest. So I'm going to hand over to the both of you. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Andrew, for the intro. All right, so people used to say that data is the new oil. Now data is actually the fuel that NatWest is using to drive our corporation's commitment to climate agenda. Last year, in February 2020, Alison Rose announced our purpose-led strategy. Core to this was our commitment to tackling one of the biggest challenges of our time, climate change. As a leading bank in the UK for business customers and one of the largest retail customer bases, we have a significant responsibility and, more importantly, the ability to encourage, enable, and lead the way in which we help people across the UK and businesses transition to a new zero carbon economy. We're actually doing this in 4 key ways. We're getting our own house in order. So we've linked our remuneration for our executives to achieving our climate ambitions. We're becoming climate positive for our own operations. Secondly, we're helping our customers. We're working with our oil and gas customers to ensure they have credible transition plans aligned with the 2015 Paris Agreement by the end of this year. We're aiming to have 50% of all UK and Republic of Ireland mortgage customers' homes with an EPC rating of C or above. Thirdly, we're looking at responsible financing, delivering 20 billion of funding and financing for climate and sustainable finance, halving the climate impact of all of our financing activity and a full phase out of coal lending. And lastly, we're engaging in really powerful partnerships. We were the first major UK bank to sign up for the Science Based Target Initiative, and we're the principal sponsor of COP26. And I'm sure you've seen in the press some of the other things that NatWest is doing in this space. I'm going to turn over to Andy now. I mean, Andy, these are huge commitments for the bank to make. And as the head of data and analytics and technology for climate, you have a significant role to play in enabling NatWest to deliver on these promises. It'd be great if you could tell us a bit more about some of the regulatory commitments that are also critical for us to achieve our climate ambition.
Thanks, Sarah. So this is a pretty fast moving and active space at the moment. I mean, even in the last week, there's been a number of reports published. So the Treasury Select Committee issued their report on net zero and the future of green finance. There's been new initiatives launched around GFANZ for COP26 and a whole range of other stuff across the EU. But what I wanted to just kind of focus on is a couple of the core pieces that are already in legislation that we're working on and are active for this year. So one of the key ones in the UK is from the PRA, and it's SS319. And that is looking for banks to introduce climate into their risk frameworks. And that has a pretty material impact from a data and technology perspective. It's looking to bring in new factors and new risk types into decision making in a pretty short period of time. And this has been an active focus for the bank over the last kind of 18 months. This is running in parallel to what we call the CBES, which is the Bank of England stress test on climate. That is due to commence in the next kind of 6 weeks or so, and the final guidance and instructions have come out from the Bank of England in the last couple of weeks. Again, this is a pretty major shift from what we've historically done on stress testing and looks to stress our current balance sheet, but looking 30 years in the future brought back to today. So it's a very different technique and a different demand from a data and technology point of view. The other pieces that many of the audience may well have seen and heard of are TCFD, which is looking to be made mandatory, and that is looking like that will kick in the next few years. Already you will see the main banks across the UK making disclosures from a climate perspective, including our own that went out earlier this year. And finally, I think an area that is going to grow and continue to get a significant amount of focus is the EU Green Sustainable Action Plan and the EU Green Taxonomy, as well as the UK government having announced that they will have a UK version of that Green Taxonomy. Being able to consistently classify what activities are green, but also what activities count towards transition is going to be absolutely critical to avoid greenwashing, and making sure that the markets are operating in a transparent and clear way.
That's an excellent intro to the reg environment, and there's such a lot of complexity there. I think many of you have now seen a poll where we've asked you what you're seeing as the most, where your firms are investing the most as you deliver on your own ESG strategy. So it'll be interesting to see those results in a minute. But Andy, I guess just to kind of continue on with you, wow, third-party data sources, I'm sure you'll have a comment on that in a minute. But to continue on with you, I mean, given you're at the front of trying to build our data and technology platforms for the bank around these commitments, it'd be great to hear how you're organising and driving delivery of this for the bank. And actually, can we bring that poll up for a second again, just to kind of see where we are with the results? Okay, great. All right, Andy, I'll hand back to you then to talk us through what you've been doing.
Great. So that was almost set up. As I guess the first thing I was going to talk around is we've spent the last 18 months looking at and sourcing external data. We have around 100 data sources that we've identified across the sector and across emissions that we are exploring and ingesting. And they range from relatively small, free to use kind of government emissions tables up to some of the big meaty commercial data fits that are emerging. This market is extremely fluid. The vast majority of available data sets are either from government source and look at national and sectorial emissions pathways and assumptions, or listed companies. We are seeing a significant gap in available data on the medium cap and small to medium enterprise area that don't have their own sustainability functions or disclosures yet. And that's certainly an area for our partnerships and collaboration that we're exploring. The second part is we're looking at ways in which we can clean up and enhance our internal data sets. The climate agenda is driving a need for more granularity in terms of what our customers do and how they do it than we've needed in the past. We need to know where assets are and where all of the assets are, not just the headquarters. So there's a real exploration of how we can better leverage our internal data assets, including the fact that we've got a huge volume of transactions that our customers use us for, and can we use that to better understand the carbon impact. And the final area is that we have a lot of investment in new technical capabilities, so machine learning, AI, graph databases, and looking at ways in which we can explore and utilize those technologies to really drive forward this agenda. Can we deliver new products to market? Can we support our businesses understanding how we could use that? So I think that probably leads us to quite a nice point. I guess, Sarah, in your role as head of data for commercial NatWest markets, how are you going to leverage and integrate this new data into the business area for decision making? And I guess while we talk about that, we're going to pop up another poll question around data governance and whether you've incorporated BCBS 239 principles into your ESG data requirements. So over to you, Sarah.
Thanks, Andy, and we'll have a look at that poll in a minute. So I guess it's been quite an interesting journey. In our markets business alone, we've identified over 50 different requirements, new requirements really, for data and understanding that will help us better understand our own carbon footprint, meet some of those regulatory requirements you spoke about, and most significantly, and where we're really focused, is helping our customers achieve their own ESG goals. We've classified the data requirements that we've had into 5 main areas around carbon emissions, EPC ratings, ESG ratings, own emissions, and physical risks. There's been a huge demand for data to drive our outcomes for our customers. And the positive impact that we can have for our customers is massive if we can help finance their transition to a lower carbon footprint. But in order to do this, we really need to leverage that data that you were speaking about before to understand and classify industry activities in ways we haven't done before. We need to understand their financed emissions, and we need to understand their financials. So there's a huge demand for both data internal to our corporations and to ourselves. And then how do we model the pathway to emission targets? And that really leads us to what are the products that we need in order to support our customers through their transition. We've also heard, and I'm sure many of you have, a significant number of your customers say that the lack of information and data is one of the greatest barriers in achieving their own climate ambition. Given our scope and knowledge of our customers and their financing needs and transactions, we're actually in a really opportune position to help our customers knock down that barrier. Earlier, I asked how many of you, or Andy did, are incorporating BCBS 239 principles for your ESG data requirements. Let's see if we can get a view on that now, actually. Okay, 56% no, 44% yes. Now, the reason we've asked this question is, I don't know about you guys, but it's a common question that I get, is how can I trust that the data we're sourcing for climate is going to be fit for purpose for our regulators and for our customers? Now, as someone that's spent the better part of my career championing consumers being more demanding around data quality, this has been one of the first times that I've really seen the business push for greater scrutiny and data governance and the incorporation of BCBS 239 principles around this data program. And that's really meant that Andy has partnered with the Chief Data Office across NatWest to ensure that we have really good definitions of our data, that we've got transparency around where we're sourcing that data from, that we understand data profiling, so we're in a better position to really stamp the quality of that data. And that's allowed us to really, for one of the first times, really implement BCBS 239 principles at the beginning of a program where we know that data is going to be massively key for us. It'd be good to tee up another question, actually. We're interested to know what you're most concerned about as you look to source data for your own ESG agenda. Data quality, data availability, transparency, cost, and integration. So hopefully that you'll be asked that question now. I think for us, as we partner with our business to support our customers in their journey, our ability to integrate new data sourcing into internal decision-making at pace is becoming a significant advantage. In some areas, that's meant us really leveraging visualization tools to join data sets in a more agile way. We're able to do that by using emerging cloud technology that will enable us to deliver insights at a faster pace with good high quality data sources, whilst developing use cases that will allow us to integrate more strategically into our core platforms. I don't know if the third poll is done yet, but Andy, you might be interested in that as we have a look at the last question for you, really. At the cutting edge of climate for NatWest, what do you see as being the big areas of evolution in this space over the next few years?
So I think for me, there's a number of routes that we will see emerge. So I think there will be a consolidation of commercial data feeds. I think the big players are already starting to hoover up and take a commanding lead in terms of availability of data. I think that we will see strong partnerships across a wider variety of firms, particularly the big tech firms, in terms of capturing and calculating emissions data. And I think we'll see a drive down in terms of granularity and detail, both from the customers that we have covered and also the information we have about each of those customers. So I think there is a huge amount of evolution. I think that the banks will need to be extremely flexible in terms of how they can respond and ingest new data sources. I think the days where you can take 18 months to bring a feed in, get it productionized, get it on-prem, matched up, lineaged and all the way through are well and truly gone. I think, the timescales we're looking to work at will be weeks and, sprints rather than months and years. So I think pace, flexibility, and the ability to tap into these emerging and evolving data feeds. So I think that that probably is about the end of our 15-minute kind of spell. I hope you've all found that quite interesting. I believe we've got time for a couple of questions. So I'm going to hand over to Andrew, who's going to, I think, help coordinate that.
Yes, thank you. Really fascinating. It's a hot topic. We are very interested in this. And I think a few of the questions really sort of drill into it, why people are interested in this particular audience. So let me throw a couple at you quickly. First one is, how does NatWest ingest all these ESG data sources, which presumably are often unstructured? So for me, I'm looking at that and I'm assuming you're not getting a lot of this data from your usual suspect data vendors. So does that mean you've got your own platform for ingesting this stuff? How do you bring it on board?
Yeah, so we've got an internal sustainable data platform that allows us to bring in data from a whole variety of sources, from kind of pretty ropey government sources all the way through to the big players. And what we're working on in parallel is actually a cloud-to-cloud and cloud-native environment that will allow us to turn on data overnight once the commercials are sorted out, and have that in its raw format in our data lake pretty much instantly. So that has been a real key development, and Climate's kind of leading the way for the organisation because of the need for the huge volume of data and the speed at which we need to ingest it.
Very good, thank you. Just as an aside on that, I mean, is there issues with formatting, getting into formats to commingle with, say, Bloomberg data and other data? Is that possible now, or is that something that's work in progress?
Yeah, so there's certain challenges. So if you buy flood data and flood maps, for example, that's geocoded. So how do you turn that into something that you can match to street addresses and physical assets? And is your data clean enough? So those sorts of challenges are well progressed. We've kind of adjusted and worked on that with both internal partners and external partners to help us get there. The reconciliation with feeds and customer IDs is always work in progress for banks, and we continue to work on that, but I've made good progress in the last 18 months.
Very good. Again, from Slido, how do you identify and select the best external sources for your needs?
Yeah, I mean, can I jump in, and then Andy, I'll pass to you. I mean, one of the things that we're doing, again, perhaps slightly differently than we might have done this in the past, is we're really understanding what those use cases are across the business. So we've reached out to all of the in commercial and NatWest markets, across wealth, across retail. What would you need ESG ratings data for example? And we're not just thinking about today, we're thinking about the future, we're thinking about how you might use that with customers, whether you might need to use that for modeling or creating your own calculations of it. And so by really understanding those use cases, it's going to enable us to go out to those vendors and really understand from them how they could be the best partner for that. So I think it's with a bit of time and space, we've been able to approach the way we talk to vendors in this space differently as well.
And I guess from a selecting the best, we've run a number of horse races with vendors. So actually, rather than try and make an assumption, we've said, well, give us access to your data, and then done the matching. And in some cases, we've taken multiple that are purporting to do the same thing, because there are variances and differences. ESG ratings is a great one. They're all different. So which one's best? I think that's probably a discussion that's still outstanding. But can we utilize those and compare them so that our businesses have all of the available information and the ranges that are being presented?
Very good. And one more quick sneaky question, under pressure to wrap up here, but just too interested. What about tracking data lineage? Is that something feasible at this point?
Because we are bringing the data into a single golden source for the organization, we have that under auto scan. So all of the feeds that we are building out into the rest of the organization are being picked up from that golden source. So we've built from a greenfield site, and we're doing lineage by design.
Got it. Fantastic. Guys, thank you so much. Really interesting project. Love you to come back in a year and tell us how you're getting on, basically. So let's aim on doing that. Thanks again, Sarah and Andy.
Thank you for having us.
Great. Okay, let's see. We've got another panel. We're gonna sort of along the same theme, expanding on it. I know data lineage will come up in this theme, in this panel. We're looking now at ESG data and reporting challenges, how can we get more meaningful measures for ESG data to drive standardization efforts? And again, we've got a lot of questions from the NatWest, for the NatWest guys, I should say, and perhaps we can pass those over for this panel if we get a chance. I'm going to hand over moderating duties to my old buddy, Chris Johnson. Hi, Chris. How are you?
Andrew, very well, thank you. Yourself?
I'm very well. It was a long time ago that we were at the Barbican or wherever it was for the big Julian Cope concert. It was last time I saw you.
Well, that was a good one to end our former lives with.
Last gig I ever saw in my former life. Well, there you go. Anyway, enough of that. I'm going to hand over to you to run this panel. So we're in good hands, everyone. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And thank you for having us, and welcome to this session today, everybody, on ESG data and reporting challenges. How can we get more meaningful measures for ESG data to drive standardization efforts? We've been seeing some of the questions and polls going through while we're in the waiting room from the previous panel. So I think there is an element of crossover. But right now, I'm going to ask our expert speakers to introduce themselves. First of all, there's a way in which you can get involved in the discussion. To the right of the video, you should see a box for questions and polls. And I think you may have just done a whole number of polls, so you should be pretty good at this. So there will be a poll coming up shortly. So if you do want to ask any questions, then please feel free to add them to the box under the questions tab. And I will be looking on Slido throughout this to try and weave in any questions if I can as we go through. If not, then we'll try and get those in at the end. It will be quite quick fire, so the sooner the questions come in, the more likely we're able to introduce, to include them. So I'm just going to ask the panel to briefly introduce themselves, sort of name, job title, company responsibilities, and their interest in ESG. And I'm going to go in alphabetical order, so starting with Beata.
Yes, thank you, Chris. Hi, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. It should be an interesting discussion. I'm the head of strategic projects at UBS in Zurich. I've been in risk and compliance and financial services for about 15 years, running initiatives like MiFID, Brexit, and other massive programs. And in terms of ESG, I'm currently getting a master's at the University of Cambridge, and I'm researching carbon disclosure comparability. So this topic is extremely close to my heart.
Thanks. And Philip?
Hi, I'm Philip Miller. I'm co-CEO and co-founder at Solidatus. I guess we're interested from the point of view of how ESG impacts companies, how we can get disclosure done properly. I have a personal interest as well. I was very lucky to spend part of my sort of formative years on a small island in the South Pacific, and I developed a real passion for water conservancy and looking after water sustainability. And so, as a sort of personal interest, that the whole ESG topic means quite a lot to me, because I can see how it affects people, and anything we can do to help that is worth it in my mind.
Fantastic. And Steph?
There, I'm Steph Neelan. I'm a Global Strategic Business Development Manager at Alveo. We are a market data management shop. And I have a special focus on the buy side and a special focus on the ESG. I recently wrote 2 white papers on it. One was all about implementing an ESG rating, and the other one is about addressing the challenges in ESG data management.
Great. And Tanya?
So my name is Tanya CJ. I'm the CEO of Arenda, a SIX company. My responsibilities, since I'm the CEO, are many, but the most important one is to keep the team happy, I guess. For my love of ESG, it goes back many years to, I guess, really as a journalist and then as a communicator on a large environmental project.
Lovely. And so right now we have a poll question. I can see on Slido it's sitting there already set up, ready to be enacted. So we've got, what are the challenges of successful ESG data sourcing and management at your organization? So challenges being from a pick list of the vendor sources are very different from usual ones. There's no standardization across the data sources. ESG data is often high in quantity, but poor in quality. And then finally, ESG data is difficult to integrate within existing systems. So please do click on your choice now, and we will see the result come through. I don't know how long this normally takes to come through, Lorna and Andrew.
Takes a little while, so you may want to, immediately.
No standardization across the data sources. Okay, that's looks like an possibly unassailable lead. Okay. So that's maybe something we can tackle now. Is that the final poll, or do we need to wait and come back to it? I can see it's now popped up on Slido on my smartphone, and it's something that's still 71% saying the biggest challenge of successful sourcing and management is lack of standardization. So I'm going to invite the panel to comment on this. Does anyone on the panel want to give a view on this?
Yeah, I'll add something. So I guess data of any kind, it needs to be clean. It definitely needs high quality. It needs to be easily accessible, definitely ingestible, but mostly it needs to be meaningful. So I can understand why the answer to it is that standardization is the most difficult challenge. I guess ESG data is unique because its purpose is to drive investment decisions and processes. It hasn't traditionally been a part of financial analysis. And so when you're talking about climate change and you're talking about water management and health and safety, those things, I mean, that is new data set. So how do you use that? But I guess ultimately what is the most important part and whether or not it's standardized is that it has more and more financial relevance. So it's an important data set. So in today's very connected world, there should be no reason why there is any lack of data. So the challenge of standardizing it may be that we consider an overarching map to something like the Sustainable Development Goals or something that's very global, and then we break it down from that point on.
Exactly. So it's very difficult to boil down the world's problems into a small number of data points. So let's crack on then with our questions. And obviously the title of the panel is how can we get to more meaningful measures to drive standardization? So it's great that the audience has got that as their biggest challenge. So going straight in, first question is, what are the drivers, regulatory and business, that are driving the demand for ESG data? And we're going to start with Beata.
Yes, thank you for that. And I can pick up where Tanya left off. So I'd say there's two areas that drive this new demand for ESG data. So firstly, I mean, starting from the beginning, there's a general agreement in the global community that we need to solve the climate crisis. And that in itself has nothing to do with data, but there's been a recent focus on investments and an increased push for asset allocation into sustainable investments. And at this point, the overarching driver in the financial services industry is the notion that we need to shift those private assets towards sustainable investments to solve that climate crisis. It's been mentioned by the World Bank, the WEF, the ESG advocates in banking like Mark Harney, Larry Fink, and so on. And it's also triggered the EU Commission to come out with this action plan to finance sustainable growth, which clearly holds the financial services industry responsible to act as a gatekeeper for asset allocation into sustainable investments. And this has then triggered a plethora of changes in the regulatory environment. And most recently, you might have seen it, the release of a proposal for new regulation, or rather a revised version of the NFRD, which is now called the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. And then simultaneously, we've got the investor community that seems to think that sustainable investments are also profitable investments, and that can be debated. But there's an increased demand for sustainable investments. Now, what does data have to do with this? Absolutely everything, because when defining what a sustainable investment is, the most important piece of that is transparency and comparability. So we need to figure out how to define how we well, what we call sustainable and what we call a sustainable investment, right?
Great.
Yeah, just
go ahead, Steph.
Yeah, sorry, just to add to that, I think, the ESG market force has been at play for quite a while. In the UN, it started in 2006. And I think if you now sort of have to put the whole play field together, you could use something as an analogy to Porter's 5 forces. You've got the consumer demand, and so the asset owners, the wealth managers are doing this on behalf of the millennials and the pensioners. You've got the standards that are out there because apparently, there's such a wild growth of different standards that it needs some official standards like SASB, SDI, AOP, SFDR, and with the TCFD. These are either start as voluntary standards and then become more legal standards, or they are really enforced by governments. And on the other hand, you've got you've got consumer demand, you've got the standards, then you've got the data suppliers that have been pushing for this, because I would say ESG standards are and ratings are gold. So you've got the likes of the MSCIs, Morningstars, the S&Ps, Refinitiv, Bloombergs, and ICE are really pushing for data to be consumed. And then you got all sorts of substitutes that are there, which are the already ready available ETF products, indices, funds, exchange traded products. Plus there's a lot of industry rivalry. So consumer demand, standards, data suppliers, substitutes, and industry rivalry is what puts this whole, let's say, vortex and turmoil altogether. And it's really coming at a high momentum.
Absolutely. And there are many other very high profile and well-regarded ESG providers, as well as the ones that you listed, Steph. So next question is moving on to as we've been discussing, the unstructured and unstandardized world of ESG data, and that lack of uniformity that those of us from the financial data world are used to. So the question is, what challenges does this lack of uniformity present to data professionals who are trying to evaluate, govern, and manage the data? We're going to start with Tanya.
Yeah. So like we've heard, the data is not the problem. There's no lack of data in the world. So our job is to locate the sources that get us closer to, I guess, the degree of truth that we need, that our organizations need to make the best decisions when it comes to investments specifically. So as I say, and we hear it a lot in data, garbage in, garbage out. So that's a really important element. So that means bringing in multiple sources of data. And the tricky part is spending enough time with those vendors to make sure that you understand how their data behaves differently compared to others. So as an example, quickly, in our case, we extract data from social media, and we do that in real time. So our data behaves quite differently from data that's solely reliant on company disclosures, as you would expect, like the MSCIs of the world, where it may be once a year or more. So putting those two different data sets in the same bucket and asking it the same question, it doesn't help anyone. It doesn't get you any closer to understanding that. I would say also that the other challenge is creating an overarching taxonomy that allows you to bring data in from around the globe. So for with a lot of companies, they manage this by creating several ways to be able to build separate taxonomies so that it's more dynamic for them, and they can move more quickly with the way the industry is changing.
Thank you very much, Tanya. And Philip, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I guess from the data geek's point of view, it's very difficult to compare things without some sort of standardization. If everything's unstructured and if everything's working to a different standard, then you find it quite difficult to manage, if you like, the supply chain aspect of the problem space. So if you want to, you're going to try and compare apples with apples, but actually you're going to find yourself working out, spending quite a lot of the time analyzing different structures so that you can draw comparisons between them. And this is borne out by the amount of frameworks out there. I think I heard it quoted, and I haven't really gone through every single one myself, but well over 1,500 different standards for recording this type of data, and that's just the standards themselves, like standards, let alone the formats of the data. And of course, there are millions and millions of companies in the world, all trying to do their best to conform to one thing or another thing. And particularly when you get to the multinationals, okay, what are you going to do? Are you going to race to the bottom? You're going to try and pick the standard that works best for you. How do you compare that? How do you rate that sort of thing? And they're all the sort of data science, data geekery standards problems that existed in financial services, decades ago, that we've had to work out in order to get good. The other aspects of financial services is that the data, the quality of the data that we're used to having now is driven by the fact that regulation had to come in and say, well, I'm sorry, I just can't work out what you're doing, and neither can you. And you have to have these things in order to be able to do proper analytics on it, and actually to rate yourself properly against other people. And I think that's a matter of maturity. These things people will start looking for the best standards, and it's then I guess later on in this discussion we can talk a little bit about that. But picking your way through that problem in order to expose the right way of measuring things is actually probably going to be one of the first big tasks.
So picking is good, cherry picking is not good.
Exactly. And
that's
the thing,
the conundrum.
Absolutely. And I spent years, trying to define a swap in financial services, just because, some people wanted it one way and other people wanted another, and be able to recognize this conversation. I must have spent, 2 good years of my life trying to go through those things, and people will go that way. And the cherry picking aspect will have to be at some point recognized for what it is.
Yeah, it's like very illiquid asset prices, where you can get many different answers, and they're not necessarily wrong, they're different. So just on this, just a wider discussion about that divergence, and particularly with scores and ratings, but also with many other aspects of ESG, the divergence and the problems that causes, possibly even the opportunities that gives. Beata, do you have some brief thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do. Look, ratings are divergent from one rating agency to the next, right? And I think there's a lot of reasons, but 2 come to mind specifically. And firstly, I think every rating agency defines what ESG means for itself. And that's largely owed to the fact that ESG methodologies are a social a construct of underlying norms and values that's particular to that organization, right? So it's an extremely broad topic, and which is also the multitude of all those standards that are out there that Philip already mentioned. And that brings me to the second cause for divergence between ratings. It's the divergence between the standard setters, right? So the standard setters build the frameworks along which organizations disclose that data, and that's often used by the rating agencies. And the main ESG standard setters, they're actually working with entirely different ground rules. And it goes even as far as them not agreeing on basic concepts such as materiality. Like some work with financial materiality, others work with stakeholder materiality, and some are looking at, a dynamic materiality focus. So the main ones that I'm talking about here would be, the TCFD, SASB, GRI, CDP, CDSB, and you would have heard of all of those. Now the corporates will go and they'll pick 1 or 2 of these standards, and they'll publish their ESG information, and that then makes it hard to compare them to their peers, which might have picked different standards. And so the rating agencies, they collect all this data, and they end up coming up with some estimates, but they're obviously divergent because they're based on different norms, different values, and different information. And then the last point I'm going to make, and that's just an example, those ESG standards in themselves are actually, they leave a lot of room for interpretation, right? So if you're looking at greenhouse gas emissions and the reporting thereof, you would think it's fairly simple to standardize that if you just follow the greenhouse gas protocol, which is widely used, for example. But even there are several studies that show that organizations that publish based on the greenhouse gas protocol, and they're publishing for the Carbon Disclosure Project, and they're using the same metrics, but the numbers that they're publishing in their annual report are different from those under CDP, so the greenhouse gas protocol, which says everything essentially. Right.
That's absolutely brilliant example. Thank you. And we're going to have to move on with the debates. But do you have a final quick thought on the problems, Steph?
Yes, I do. I mean, it's very clear that the ratings are diverging. There are studies out there from MIT where they compared some 4 or 5 raters altogether, or agencies, as you might call them. And they said they looked at the MSCI World Benchmark and said, okay, there are some that are completely divergent, others are nicely aligned. Funny enough, it shows that where the divergence is the biggest, there is the highest risk premium. So you can imagine that you want to have a company that gathers rating information from all these different agencies and really focus with your in-house team on where those ratings are diverging the most. And because that's
exactly
where the most return is to be had.
And that's that's great, because we've been talking about the challenges, but there is actually that little kind of important opportunity that is also part of this conundrum. Right, so moving on with pace, we obviously, as data managers, we want to see standardization. So the question is about what standardization measures are we expecting this year? Philip.
Well, there's going to be some obvious areas of convergence. You'll have blocks that will pick, you know, like the European Union will pick a thing and say we prefer things in that particular way. So there'll be political considerations behind this, no doubt. People like the World Economic Forum have come forward, and that for me felt like a bit of a moment. There's been a bit of a shift. We've seen quite a lot of people reformatting their reporting based on that as a taxonomy, and I guess that's where I would get to is trying to at least have equivalents in the taxonomies that are out there, even if they're not exactly the same, is that they can have some sort of interchange. There are too many, so picking some and then moving towards them is you know, it's the logical conclusion to everything we've just been saying. We've got to have more uniformity. Standardization in and of itself isn't the be all and end all. There has to be some leeway to be you know, innovative, and I think that's one of the things that I would take as a learning from financial services, is that we didn't allow the standards to evolve as the situations changed, allowing a certain amount of that if you like, exotic new stuff to be brought in without having to go back and go through a whole year-long cycle of going through a committee phase and redoing things, is actually one of the big learnings from the last, if you like, the last 10, 15 years of investment banking in particular going through this. So standardization, great, equivalence, great, and leave yourself some wiggle room to take change in.
And that wiggle room is where the data manager has a bit of a headache. So let's just finish this one off, Beata, on the what you were expecting this year for standardization, just briefly.
Yeah, look, voluntary and mandatory disclosure are two different things. So we've got the voluntary side where there's clearly an alignment and a consolidation going on. There's been a published statement of the intent to work together between the big standards and so on. There's alignment going on with the IFRS. But the big one for me, and that's probably just because I'm in Europe and working for a Swiss bank, is definitely the EU regulatory regime. And there's a triangle of regulations that's really tightening the reins right now. So you've got the NFRD, which is being replaced by this CSRD now, and that's the regulation that forces corporates to disclose non-financial sustainability information. That's then being picked up by the financial services industry under the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, and they then disclose on product and entity level on sustainability topics, right? But the tricky part here is the EU taxonomy, and the EU taxonomy in its annex defines what the language is for this reporting, and that's where it becomes standardized, right? That's where the threshold for economic sustainable activity are, and that's for me where the standardization is. But that being said, 6 environmental goals, and that's just the E out of the E, S, and the G, and only 2 of those are defined, and that's just the climate goals, basically. So it's only 11%, right? But that to me is where the standardization is going to happen.
That's an area where it will happen this year. I think that's probably the area where it will happen this year. I agree. So moving on to what can we do as financial institutions with this not everyone calls it non-financial data, but a lot of people do call ESG non-financial. What approaches can we take to managing uniformity and classifications for reporting? We've just talked through for quite some time about the differences and the very good reasons why there are differences. So and Beata, you just took us down there on the company disclosures, but how do we manage that uniformity? How do we get reporting that is consistent for investors? Philip?
Well, there's the carrot and the stick approach, right? The carrot is it's good for you to do this. The stick is if you don't do it in a comprehensible way or a believable way, then your investors or people around you, that maybe your clients or people who are selling to you, are not going to believe what you're saying. And I think that credibility of not having that standardized approach is very palpable. So what can financial institutions do? They can learn from the last 10 years of disclosures in different areas. So everything from regulatory reporting to anti-financial crime, anti-money laundering, those sort of things have all gone down this path, even just down to know your client. Having a framework and a taxonomy that is believable and transparent is absolutely critical for this sort of thing, and being able to then display that in a way that's, again, credible, but understandable to the people who are the stakeholders, and that's not just the wider public. That is your vendors, that is your supply chain, that is your board, because people will drive investment decisions based on this. And so the stick is in the first part. Do you have credibility? And because of that, do I feel that you're a safe place to harbour my money? And that's the carrot on the other side is if you do it well, and then people can see, okay, I've got it under control, and it's believably so, then you're going to reap some benefits, at least in the short term, before the real regulatory sticks come in, which have got to happen in the next couple of years, which will then make it, a burden on you as an organisation. The learning the financial institutions have to go through is the quicker they do this, the less the regulation will be forced upon them later in the financial sense with penalties. Because if they get this right early and show their house is in order, in every walk of life where self-regulation has worked best, it's where it's been well implemented. Where it doesn't work and the regulator has to come in and say, I'm sorry, you're not in control of something, we don't believe it, you're not transparent, and so forth. So it's in everyone's interest to do this properly and quickly.
Yeah. Okay, very, very good. Right, I'm going to crack on because I'm conscious of the audience. This is their double dose of ESG because the previous panel was ESG too. So I'm going to move on now to data architecture considerations for integrating the non-standardized ESG into the enterprise data management systems, which are really, generally speaking, designed for golden source data. So how, as a data architect, do you handle ESG in a golden source type of environment? Steph?
Yeah, that's what we do. What we have been doing for many years on the sell side institutions when it came to market data. ESG data is obviously a new kind of data, but the way to approach it and the way to ingest it is pretty much the same. So no doubt ESG data offers a source of new and potentially valuable information and that can contribute to a long-term investment risk and opportunities. But yet, how do you structurally integrate this and make it into an investment decision-making framework and process? That's still challenging. So the idea is to mix raw ESG data with ratings from any vendor source and start to analytically derive your own ESG ratings. Okay. And that is definitely for those where the ratings are really diverging. And that's what I said earlier. That's probably where a lot of opportunity is. But you want to get a better grasp on these variances, and you can only do that by looking at the raw data and then comparing how it comes in from different vendors. And you have to have an ESG data model.
So basically unpicking it and reassembling it. Okay, that's what I think pretty much most large asset managers are doing. And Tanya?
Yeah, I would just add on to that because I think we're very similar in what the architectural requirements are. So the volume of data is large for both structured and unstructured data sources. Not only are you pulling in unstructured data and then turning it into structured data, but then there's a whole bunch of data sets that are built from that based on new taxonomies, changing taxonomies, et cetera. And then you have the integration into the investment process, which is also challenging, particularly because of ESG's lack of standardization. So one of the customers that we came across, they had a really interesting approach. They created their own taxonomy, common taxonomy, and they mapped all of their data vendors to that, which is what it sounds like we're talking about here. So I thought that was a smart solution for sure. And then, the construction of ESG portfolios requires really important information there, and that goes right down to the individual security. So then you have another layer of detail that is associated with that.
Yeah. And the way I see it, taxonomy is just another form of categorization of data, right? So if you start with building up your own, then you can always make the translations to other taxonomies maybe, but at least you got a grip on the data.
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing is that the key thing for data architecture is to understand what that data is and what it's needed for, and then accommodate it. It's not going to be a cookie cutter type approach. It's an alternative type of data set that needs to be understood, and it's not going to fit the norm. It's going to need more than we it'll need quite a lot of attributes.
Yeah, and you want a real industrial solution, I think, to these problems, because spreadsheets don't scale.
Oh gosh, good point. Right, cracking on to the plumbing, and this is like good old financial instrument and entity mapping, bringing in data from ESG providers who aren't necessarily data companies, they're more research. What are the when you're managing your data integration, how different is it for ESG? What things you have to do to ingest ESG information into your financial data, Steph?
So I would say you need an ESG master on top of what you might call your security master and your price master or your fund master or your index master. You need an ESG master on top of it. And that should be able to gather all the investee companies' information. But then the question is, how do you link it to all the securities of all the asset classes you've got under management? That in itself is quite a challenge, and you need industrial solution to do that. You need to have a normalized model, basically saying that for each and every field that comes in from the different vendors, I've got a placeholder, and some of the fields could be, like Beate said already, could be the same, others could be slightly different. Your model should allow for all these different attributes to come in, and then you need to have validation rules on top of that, and start consolidating and aggregating.
So in short, it's not easy, and it's not going to be
plug
and play.
It's not plug and play. I mean, there are systems out there that can help you, but you're still going to have to do some work.
Yeah, definitely an area where we need help. So I don't mean that HSBC needs help. I mean, it's an area where anybody working with this type of data needs help. Right, so final question. I've got a couple of questions that come in on Slido. Do fire in any more. I'll try and cover them. Is climate data. So I focus on climate first. It's a significant focus, particularly following the initial sort of the switch last year towards the social aspects following the pandemic. I think we're now back into climate first in ESG circles, and it's challenging managing all the different coverage aspects for climate. So the question is, how are new technologies being leveraged to fill the data gaps and provide insights into climate data? Tanya.
So this question brought me back to when I was working at the remediation project several years ago. And one of the commitments was actually to provide air quality monitoring in real time with early warning detection for the community. So that required a tremendous amount. This was 2007, and it required a tremendous amount of sophistication, lots of technology, tremendous amount of data. You wouldn't believe how much data. So I would say that most technologies today, they have some degree of AI, which allows for better interpretation, like I said, for financial industries. But if I was to think beyond that, I mean, the data, we have climate data that goes back decades. Technology, if we don't have it, we can build it. But what I think about is are we connected to the right people on our team? So are we connected with academics who have dedicated their careers to this, to better understanding climate change? Are we connected to people who are actually worked in the field, tried to prevent land erosion, those kinds of things? Are we bringing them in and getting their perspectives? I think having that kind of a diverse expertise or skill set when we're trying to solve these problems is a bigger area to focus, or a stronger way of making the change that we need. It's not necessarily technology, it's the people.
Very good point. So it's the content, not so much the IT, but obviously the technology, the techniques can help. So yeah, finally, Philip, your thoughts on how technologies can help with climate data?
Well, I mean, my background personally is artificial intelligence, so I'm going to have a sort of AI slant to that. But I think Tanya's point about, the last year and what was said earlier, I think by Beata, about the pandemic coming in and things shifting around. There's a certain amount of learnings I think we can take from the last year. If I think it's a fairly small lift. There's a climate change problem, right? If we see it as if we see it like the pandemic, we know that we have done some pretty amazing things in the last year to kind of solve a really big problem for the planet. Now, there's no reason why we can't sort of take that heavy lifting approach and take some of that real force of scientific power, and then link it to the technology stuff that we've been learning. If I think about when I started artificial intelligence 25 years ago, it was really theoretical stuff, and I think, to my mind, that's kind of still where we are with climate change. We're still in the real theory. We haven't weaponized the solution, the solutioneering for this now. If we take all of that and we look at AI has moved on massively. Yes, we can deploy AI now. Let's look at really how we can progress through the technology phases to solving the climate problem, with all the learnings that we'll get, all these data sources which will suddenly become available. So where people in theory, so all the academics in theory have been working really with their hands tied behind their back, they haven't had access to tremendous amounts of data. If we can get the right data exposed to these people and kind of weaponize it in the same way that we've been beating the pandemic, like, let's face it, this is a really serious problem.
Well, it's certainly getting that level of attention, that's for sure. And I think what I'm also hearing, and this may be a surprise to those listening, is how ESG has been around for decades, 30 or 40 years in some cases. So it's not new, it's just still very immature, very complicated. And what also might be quite surprising is quite how early we are on that journey, and how much opportunity there is for these modern techniques to help to move us up the scale. And looking at the maturity level of ESG, it's really, really low on maturity.
You can probably look at it and go,
lots of work.
20 years ago, we wouldn't have had some of the compute power we've got today to help solve these problems. And actually, we're in we're in quite rude health to kind of divert power and scientific knowledge into this area now. We've had a good trial run with the pandemic. We know how to do these things as a sort of human race. Well, we can do this if we want to. Yep.
Right. So a couple of final points. I know I think we're just about okay on time, so we're going to wrap up in a minute. We're just going to quickly tackle these two questions. Hopefully the panelists are looking at this and have seen these two questions come in. The question is about ESG reporting. So anyone on the panel who's doing ESG reporting, is how you can achieve trust in the data to ensure that what is communicated to investors is accurate and reliable. Anybody want to tackle that one?
I think one of the learnings that I've had more recently is that things get out of date really quickly. And actually, one of the things that would drive more trust, I think, is when these, because they're coming out as sort of annual reports, and they're coming from a very high level in organizations, for sure. I mean, the office of the CEO is involved. There's a board member who's in charge of all this stuff. But actually, they're quite big information gathering exercises at the moment. It doesn't feel like it's got into the ethos of most companies to keep this data flowing in the same way that other data flows. So I think one of the aspects that will have to mature quite quickly is to make these reports more live, so that they're more like dashboards than just static documents.
Yeah, and as far as reporting today to investors, we've actually devised a way of doing this. I'm talking about my company in HSBC in the Security Services Division, and what we found is finding data points that do exist. What we found is, because of the variability, a way of doing that is to actually offer a choice and saying there is variability and difference, and that's good and understood, and that's not likely to change anytime soon, and provide that choice and a range, if you like, rather than just trying to give an answer. But obviously what investors want is a definitive answer, and that will come with disclosures and with maturity and with common standardization, which we've discussed in this panel. Last question is, how can financial firms express their commitment to ESG and sustainability in a market that's exploding but has few common measures and standards? So this is the question about the commitment to ESG in a sort of moving landscape. How can financial firms express that?
I've got some thoughts on that. I think you're asking a question. It's a strategic question, right? It's a question: do you want to commit or do you want to comply? And committing would mean you're aiming for positive impact. So you can't just, as a bank, go and say, I'm going to be an ESG leader now. That's probably not good enough. You have to decide, do I just want to not do anything bad and just comply with regulations, and that should be it, and I'll just be a financial services provider? Or do I want to commit to net zero? I want to have scrutiny around all my portfolios, my own investments, my clients' investments. And when somebody takes a closer look, and this will happen, I mean, one part of this new regulation is there will be a third-party audit that's mandated for these disclosures, right? Is there anything they can find? So you have to make absolutely sure you're not doing anything wrong, and that takes a lot more than just complying with the disclosure requirements, right? So I think that's a fundamental strategic question. Yes. Answer, right?
No, I think that's it. How you can demonstrate it in an area where there's an element of flux is to produce products and insights that move the dial, that go towards achieving those sustainability outcomes. We get clients asking us that they want to know how our approach is making a difference to net zero, how our approach is making a difference to improving ESG. Right, so I think that brings us to the end of our session. And so at this point, I need to, I think, ask Andrew to join us again.
I'm here. Good to see you, Chris. Yes, we're done with that session. Fascinating chat, guys. Really appreciate it. ESG, obviously a hot topic. I didn't realize it was an immature 40-year-old. But I've learned something today. Great session, much appreciated, and we'll move on to the next topic. Thanks everybody, thanks for joining us and thanks for your contribution. As an aside to the audience, you may know that we at A-Team have a number of ESG related webinars coming up, so you can get more information on this topic from those. You can sign up probably on this page or on Data Management Insights, so go there and sign up. We also are planning an ESG briefing in London. At the moment, this is going to be a physical event, September 14th. More details to come. So if this is your hot topic, then make sure you sign up for those. Right, we're going to move on. We're a little bit behind, but I know we can whisk through. We've got the next session, a data strategy spotlight, approaches to driving successful digital transformation with data management. Data management, the move to a data-driven enterprise and digital transformation have been regular themes over the past few years for this conference. So, it's a topic close to our heart. To help me with this discussion, we've got Simon Cole from Hyvera, Stuart Pitt from Alatus, and Malavika coming back Malavika Solanki from DSB, Derivative Service Bureau. Thanks all for joining. Maybe just briefly, if you could introduce yourselves in terms of your interest and involvement in this topic area, starting with you, Stuart.
Hi, I'm Stuart Pitt from Alatus. I've got over 20 years experience working in data, living and breathing in financial services. What me and my co-founder found was that the importance of data to the financial services was increasing, but the knowledge about that data was decreasing. So we've developed a solution to capture the knowledge on end-to-end data lineage and all the uses that the data's made of the data to help collaboration and reduce siloed data stores and siloed projects.
Great, thank you.
Implementing in a Big Four bank at the moment.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Simon.
Yes, so Simon Cole from Hyvera. We really help organizations understand their unstructured data. So all of that chaos and that toxic data that we tend to run our businesses on, but then maybe don't take good regard to in terms of managing that. So we really help organizations on that transformation. And as part of that, a key focus for us is helping them understand the risk within that data and helping them score that risk so that they can lay down a benchmark and a framework that they can build upon then over time as they look to improve their situation with it.
Very good, thank you. And Malavika, welcome back. For those who are joining us now, just a few words on who you are.
Hi everyone, Malavika Solanki, as Andrew said, from the Derivative Service Bureau. What the firm does is generate standardized identifiers and classification codes for OTC derivatives, all of which kind of follow and acts as a golden source for a number of values. My particular focus and role is around stakeholder engagement and strategic service delivery. And my background's over 2 decades in the OTC derivatives market, for those of you who may know me.
Very good, excellent. Thank you all for joining us. Let's kick off with a sort of scene-setting question, if you like. Start with you, Malavika, then go through the panel. Examples of a digital transformation program where you have seen most progress over the last 12 months. I'm mindful that the last 12 months haven't been a typical 12 months, but there has been progress nonetheless. Malavika.
Indeed, there has, and I would almost say in some ways the extraordinary circumstances of the last year have almost accelerated the pace of that progress, just for the simple reason that if one thinks of digitization, because there's different ways to think of digitization, but if one thinks of it as effectively trying to streamline your processes and bring them online and move away from that paper-based view of the world that used to exist previously, then the two biggest things that really have shifted are one around customer onboarding, regardless of whether it's retail or institutional. And the second is around identifier issuance and things like that. So anything that in essence, things that that used to be dependent on getting paperwork to someone or documentation to someone, the volume of what's gone on in the last year, but also the way in which we're all working, whether it's customers or employees of any given organization, have meant that firms have had to fundamentally rethink some of their digital transformation programs. And perhaps what a couple of firms have said to me is that they've had effectively a month or two to put in place what was otherwise going to be a 10-year strategy and really unpick from that what the immediate needs were. And it focused the mind in ways that many institutions I've spoken with have found very helpful.
Very good. So Stuart, perhaps a sense of urgency has been injected into proceedings by current circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely. I think from sheer necessity, lots of programs and lots of things have been accelerated, particularly moving to Zoom meetings, allowing staff accessing fairly critical systems remotely from necessity. That was probably much further down the line until the organisations were more comfortable with security around those, but they've been forced into it. And I think probably acceleration of chatbot functions that enable staff to be less involved in some of the processes that are more repeatable and using that sort of machine learning and artificial intelligence that's growing to leverage machines' capabilities.
Very good. Simon, going back to the original question, areas where you've seen progress over the last 12 months.
Yeah, I think it's been an interesting one. Interesting, I guess, is one word for the last 12 months, but it's been challenging, complicated, and very fast. And I do believe there's going to be a sting in the tail because of how we've adapted in some ways over the last 12 months as well. We were certainly speaking to firms, I would say 13 months ago, that said they were never going to go to the cloud. And that strategy lasted about 2 weeks into March, and all of a sudden, within 6 weeks, hey presto, they had made it onto the cloud. In fact, I was speaking to one business leader who said that if he ever sees a proposal again for a transformation program that is more than 2 months long, he's going to be asking lots of questions, given what they were able to transform. So I think for us at the start of the last 12 months, really, that rush to get people online, that rush to get people to get the data where it needed to be, so that for business continuity, was a really key thing. I think in some senses the rush meant that we did it without some of the controls and without some of the structure, and without certainly that regulatory view that we typically would have seen in place. So I think, as I said, there is going to be a tail as organizations at this point are taking that breath, looking back at where they are, and then deciding actually, how do we make this permanent? How do we go forward with this? And how do we, in some senses, clean up? And cleaning up data after the horse is bolted, as we all know, is a very challenging problem. It's great when it's part of a program, but very hard to retrospectively do.
Absolutely. So a bit of mopping up could be a bit messy over the next 6 to 12 months, just to sort of become more standardized, a bit more strategic in our view. Let's go on. I'll Stuart, coming back to the idea of data management as part of a digital transformation program. What do you see as the important elements of data management that needs to be in place to ensure the success of any digital transformation?
Yeah. I think a key thing is an assumption, or avoid the assumption that what you currently have is right and fit for purpose, and that you're just trying to migrate it onto new platforms. There's a lot of constraints around current solutions, so you really need to understand what are the true data requirements in the new world, and make sure that those are built into your the new program, and then make sure that you probably are capturing a lot more data, a lot of new data attributes that aren't being captured in the current process. You might end up having to go upstream to look at onboarding systems and add more screens that input the data. And then obviously data quality is critical. As Simon said, you need to make sure you've measured the data quality and have actions in place to correct it. And importantly, in the new process, make sure that the good quality is inbuilt into the process right from the staff inputting the data up front, all the way through the end-to-end process, right out to regulatory reporting at the back end.
Very good, thank you. Malavika, elements of data management. I mean, we're doing a lot of work in the post-trade environment. People are talking about simplifying workflows and the like. It's more than just the data, it's about process as well.
Absolutely. So that actually goes back to a point that came up in the discussion earlier today at this event, which is agree what good looks like and be really clear on why it is you're pursuing that goal, because your data has to operate in the context that it's trying to serve. You have to understand what that is. So the first thing is, what does good look like? Why are you trying to get there? And then look at, okay, then what are the data elements we need? What is the provenance around those? What is the context in which that data applies? Does that work? Because a data point in isolation can be used several different ways and readily should be. But you need to really understand in terms of bare bones and early stage, what are your elements? What is the context in which those elements operate? What is the quality of the provenance from where they come from? How comfortable are you that what you're putting into your systems at a foundation level actually doesn't require rewriting 3 months down the line or 2 years down the line because something wasn't clearly defined and articulated?
Very good, thank you. Simon, so data management is the foundation.
Yeah, I think for us, again, I'm borrowing on what Stuart and what Malavika has said, is really around, what we do in advance of it. It's the planning of it. It's about that business engagement, which is really critical, and being very, very clear on the outcomes and why we're doing the program. Change is always an opportunity for improvement. Digital transformation is usually part of an improvement process, unless, of course, it is crisis-led. And in that way, sometimes IT can take a lead in a process rather than maybe being business-led. So people we tend to see come at it with two objectives, and they one body of, or one view will be, let's take the data over and then we will cleanse the data after the fact, or we will cleanse the data in advance of taking it over. And we typically find, well, it's no great shock that people don't go back. Once you've made that transformation, if you don't get it right, people will never go back and fix that data, which kind of leads to three outcomes. You bring the risk with you, you bring all of the problems that existed with you. You typically break the data in the process because it's not well thought out. And in our world, in the unstructured world, bringing, sets of data, even like linked spreadsheets over, and not making sure that they relink at the far side of something, you can break an entire department through that single thing. And then finally, you get that disappointment within the business because you may have brought the data over, but you have brought those problems, and they've got all of the nice shiny new tools. But when they go and try and retrieve the data, it's still buried and hidden within that same mess that it was. So it's really important, in all of this, it's all about how you approach the program and having the right objectives and the right drivers as part of it.
Very good. So Stuart mentioned data quality, so let's talk about that. Same with you, Simon. What are the initial requirements for data quality if you are to embark on a digital transformation program? What do you need to put in place on that with respect to integrity?
Sure. And look at, I'm at the risk of repeating myself. This is all about what you do up front. Let's understand several things. Let's understand the value of the data. Understanding the purpose of the data becomes increasingly important, because that not only takes on, from a business perspective, why you need the data, but from a privacy perspective often, and making sure that you're mapped right across all of the regulations that we face. Understanding the data we keep, understanding the data that you have to remove, let alone the data you want to remove, and ensuring that you've taken in that regulatory perspective, so that when you look at it from a quality perspective, you can make sure that not only is the data accurate for the business purpose, but against the regulations, you have got that mapping right across the piece. So for us, it's all about analyzing data in advance of that, digital transformation. If you understand what you have, you can then plan and ensure that you get the success you need, out of the back of that, and you get that high quality data that not only improves the day-to-day of the people working with the data, but actually when you come to look at customer satisfaction and you come to look at client engagement, you're providing a better service. It's been well defined and well understood, just that internal improvement, how that really reflects outwards from the organization.
Very much. So yeah, Malavika, would you like to add to that?
So actually, I like that idea, and I concur with this idea of doing your homework in advance of starting the process. So things that we found have worked in the past and seem to resonate with industry as well, time and again, are agree the data elements that you want to focus on day one. What does that journey look like? Then, importantly, agree collectively clear definitions with all the relevant parties around that table, so that any given element has a single definition. Because the thing is, for data to work, there needs to be consistent use of any given data element. You can't have, it can be applied lots of different ways, but needs to be understood in one way and free of interpretation. So that, so the thing means the same value or the same item, regardless of who the person is, what section of the business they sit in, or what part of the world they're in. Right, so that's one piece. And then the last but not least is, I think an important part of this is also to just make sure you keep going back to getting that business buy-in. So that it's not just about the data, it goes back to purpose. And I think that context is incredibly important, because oftentimes it's easy to get excited by focusing on the data or the tools and not reminding yourself of what is the context within which all of this needs to be delivered.
Absolutely. Very good. Okay. Stuart, you had mentioned about cloud, I think, earlier on. Do you see cloud adoption as critical, a critical element of data transformation?
Well, it enables a lot more flexibility in firms to scale up and down without having to actually acquire the infrastructure internally. But I think for me, the critical element is it doesn't matter whether it's in-house, on-premise or on the cloud. If you don't know what your data requirements are, then you can have the shiniest box in the world and you won't be able to deliver very much. But I think obviously cost-wise, the move is more to cloud.
Absolutely. And what we're seeing is a lot of, you mentioned scaling up and down and perhaps taking workloads into the cloud while a transformation is ongoing. I mean, these are sort of tactical things that cloud can be used for these days, I believe. Okay, very good. So Malavika, cloud in your environment?
So we were, it goes, the scale definitely is a huge component of this, but there's also an element of resilience sometimes that you can build into things more easily. So for us, for example, we're a digitally native institution because we're relatively nascent. And what that meant is when the events of last March occurred, effectively, we were able to fairly easily, so the critical component became, did people have sufficient bandwidth and what were their working conditions? Not can they get access to the information they need to make sure the firm can continue to operate in exactly the manner it was operating previously. So it was, and that's no trivial thing, because fundamentally that it can enable a level of resilience in your organization for events like the last 12 months. The second thing actually to also add to that is what cloud can do. And again, you can do this with hard boxes as easily as cloud, but the cost ratios and the risk return starts to become quite different depending on the scale at which you're trying to operate. But what the cloud can give you, and especially in this remote environment, is a possible reduction in latency. Because your customers are dispersed around the world, your employees are dispersed around the world. If you've thought about what your cloud configuration is and how you, and where those geographically around the globe, those things are based in terms of the servers, etc., it can make an enormous difference to the way in which you're able to deliver services. So latency, for example, if you have a customer in Hong Kong, and you've got your box sitting in North Virginia, well, that's a long way for the thing to go and come back. So then if you're dealing with high volume data flows, it just exacerbates an issue that doesn't need to exist. So it depends on the kind of data you're dealing with, but if there are latency sensitivities, then that can be something that the cloud plays into at a better cost ratio.
Very good. Okay, let me just pause there and just remind the audience that we will be taking questions through Slido, which you should all be aware of now. If you've just joined us, it should be on the screen next to our video. So if you have questions for our panel, please feel free to post them throughout this session. We will have some time at the end for a couple of questions. Okay, let's talk about some of the risks involved in building out a digital infrastructure. Starting with you, Malavika, what do you see the biggest risks, really?
So two things. It depends on where you are on your transformation journey. If you're at an earlier stage, then we're back to confusing process and tools for outcome. And that's important. However, if you're at a more mature stage, in my experience, it tends to focus very much more on looking at what are your cybersecurity measures, whether you're in the cloud or otherwise. What are your cybersecurity provisions? What kind of resilience and redundancy are you building into your system? And is it fit for purpose? Because you can put a really shiny piece of kit when actually what you need is something that's much lower price because your needs are different for a particular purpose. So it's looking at that at your core needs, and the risks around these things are, if you don't think about your resiliency, the resilience and redundancy needs you may have, then you may find yourself at a point where, if you're dealing in the world of data, you have demand, something's going on in the market, you've got a spike in activity, and your processes just aren't able to cope with it because you've not thought about it enough. So those are the kinds of examples.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Simon, come back to you on the possible risks or biggest risks associated with the digital infrastructure, I noticed a question in Slido that says, is it possible to quantify the level of risk that is hidden within a data platform prior to transformation? So perhaps getting back to your point about preparing ahead of time, inbuilt risks.
Yeah, no, and it's interesting, you know, like everybody, cyber is a big risk that we see, and that security threat. But the reality is that the bigger threat is not managing that data properly. If the data is properly managed, if you've got the security in place on it, you know, whether you take it to the cloud or wherever, you know, it's about that, you know, accidental and malicious sharing. For organizations, you know, and it's on our website, we calculate a risk score for people. Effectively, we will do two things. We'll ask a bunch of questions, but we'll also look at people's data. And this is how we work with all of our clients. So we'll analyze the data, and from that, be able to quantify for them, as the question asks, exactly what what is that risk score, so that they have something that they can map onto. And the biggest risk that we see is that organizations really never map those obligations, those regulatory-based obligations onto the data. So regardless of the platform and the infrastructure that we put in place, the risk is still maintained within the data and not addressed in those highest areas of risk and exposure. You know, we're very good at managing the risk within some of those, you know, transactional platforms that we have, those line of business systems. But really, you know, there's a lot of risk hidden in plain sight in some of those other platforms. And I can't think of a single customer whose data we haven't analyzed and ultimately exposed a significant challenge where, you know, a lot of information has been typically stripped out of one of their more structured platforms and left in a pretty exposed manner for anybody to access, and ultimately providing that opportunity for leakage in that sense. So quantifying that risk up front and then being able to tackle that, and then over the life of an organization, not just a transformation program, being able to quantify that, prove it, and test it, and show that over time, we've many organizations who, you know, take a really active view in terms of being able to put a line in the sand in terms of where they sit and then measure themselves against that. So from a board perspective, from an internal exco perspective, you have that quantification, and ultimately, you know, you can sit at ease, or at least you can start to panic when the dials and the risk scores start going the wrong way.
Very good. Hopefully not panic, but at least do something about it. And along that sort of theme, come to you, Stuart, on the risks, and again, perhaps tie in with a question from Slido from the audience. Can you give examples of where firms have failed to achieve good digital transformation, and what were the contributing factors? So the risk and contributions to possible not best outcome.
Yeah. So I think the key thing goes back to what Simon said about it, you know, the transformation and the infrastructure is just a platform to hold the data. And quite often the projects focus so much on the physical infrastructure and the migration, and not actually focusing on the data and capturing, understanding where all the data is kept. So thousands of unmanaged spreadsheets that are critical to some business processes that aren't factored in to the migration, so that you still end up, even though you've got a nice shiny new platform and new processes, there's still lots of these manual adjustment processes in the new environment, simply because they weren't factored in and considered as part of the overall design prior to migration.
Very good. Thank you. And then let's, we're mindful of time here, so let's go through the panel and ask what advice each panelist would give to a CDO to ensure success for a digital transformation program. Starting with you, Simon, what would be your advice?
You'd like to hope that, you know, at this point the CDO has a pretty good handle on how to run a transformation program, but for clarity, let's map it out. And the key thing, you know, is bringing all of the stakeholders on that journey, you know, within the business, from the privacy angle through the risk angle, and ensuring that you do have that strong handle, you know, on the data in advance of the program. I think something that we see is really beneficial is not necessarily for the CDO, but the program team that they put in charge of the actual transformation have to be really strong. And in that, speaking as a vendor, they need to be very good at managing vendors as well, because these are complex multi-party programs, and you need to be successful. You need to own all of those components and make sure that the vendor is delivering what they need, and that your communication and how the business is reacting as part of that, is really clear, so timeframes are understood. And from a quality perspective, it's really important that you automate and simplify the data quality and review processes as simple as possible. If you can't bring the business with you and make it easy for them, and if they have to stop what they're doing constantly to try and fight fires and understand, what they should do with the data, you're going to lose them, and they're going to step away from the program and not engage in it. So it has to be simple, because people are busy. Everybody's doing a day job. So those are probably the key things I see from a CDU perspective, but fundamentally getting all the stakeholders on board and driving that process for them and making it simple usually leads to success.
I think your point about vendor management is well taken. These are often multi-vendor projects, legacy and new, plus outside help, difficult to manage. Stuart, what would you add to that?
Yep. So I think the critical thing is understand in the new environment, what are your detailed data requirements? So there'll be conflicting views from all the different departments involved, but underlying it is all the same data. It's the same customers, accounts, transactions, events that need to be captured, and all of these different teams and departments need to access or use most of that core data. So you need to be absolutely clear on what are the detailed requirements in the new world, and make sure that you either migrate the data that matches those, and or capture any of the gaps, so that your new environment has all the data that you need, and you don't end up with lots more siloed solutions trying to fill the gaps.
Very good, thank you. And Malavika, last words of advice.
I'd try to offer any advice for CDO with a great deal of humility, I think, given the world we find ourselves in at the moment. But with that said, to build on what Simon was saying earlier, the business buy-in is key. And one thing I found has been really helpful, depending on the organization, is to agree some metrics up front to demonstrate progress. And because that's incredibly important, because then the people from the business, regardless of whether it's the business and the tech end, but people start to feel that they're buying into it, because they start to see wins, they start to see tangible things that they agreed to up front as productive, good quality outcomes. And if you're in the beginning of a transformation program, that buy-in, for not just at the beginning, but in particular at the beginning, but even subsequently, becomes incredibly important. And the other thing I would say is, the tendency can be sometimes to bring in really bright, shiny talent from the outside, because you need data scientists, you need all of that. But making sure you integrate that incoming talent with people within your own business, so that it becomes a partnership, whether that talent is vendor driven, whether it's contractor driven, or anything else. Regardless of what happens, your business needs to survive and thrive at the end of this process. So making sure that that integration happens means that you minimize staff turnover that can sometimes happen around these things. So outcome and people would be the two things.
Very good. Okay. Well, that wraps up this session. I would like to thank Simon, Stuart, and Malavika for their insights. Much appreciated, everybody. Great stuff. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah,
thank you.
Okay. Next up, we have a session. We're going to hear a keynote on driving data and AI innovation for business transformation. We'll be hearing from Mark Scott, Worldwide Director, Data Management at Tableau. So we're going to, I believe, hear a video first, a video presentation, and then Mark and Darren from Tableau will be joining us.
Hello, everyone. Pleasure to be here. My name is Mark Scott, and I'm the Worldwide Director for Data Management Business Development here at Tableau.
Mark Scott.
I trust you've all had a productive day today at the Data Management Summit. We are excited to be a platinum sponsor, and I want to thank all of you for attending this important event. So as I was thinking about this spotlight, I wanted to make sure that this was relevant to you and also brought some value, and maybe speak a little bit about Tableau as well. My hope is that you come away from this presentation with potentially a different perspective on what self-service analytics means to your customers, and just maybe an idea or two about how to reimagine your data strategy. So most organizations today don't really. In a typical organization, less than 20% of employees are regularly engaged with data. That means that most business decisions are based on bias or what has worked in the past, rather than live, actionable insights. During a crisis, we really see a difference between these legacy businesses and data-driven businesses who are obsessive about getting data into the hands of the whole organization, moving from 20% using data to 70, 80, or even 90% of people consuming live, actionable insights to support every key workflow. The World Economic Forum calls this a time for a great reset, and we believe this starts with data. So data is a key pillar for digital transformation because every interaction in the digital world generates data. This data lets you create baselines and benchmarks for your transformation journey and provides a good indicator of progress. Historically, this data was consumed for traditional reporting and analytics for stakeholders. However, thanks to today's rapidly changing analytics market, your business users expect data to be right here, right now, delivered in real time for quick decision making, able to generate intelligence in the form of predictive and prescriptive models for optimized operating models, or available for self-service with improved quality and feel confident in their data. After all, business users simply want to be and feel confident in their data. So I think this image sums up how the current data climate feels, and it's only going to get faster or going to get more bulls. All of us in the data and analytics space are in the middle of a rush for answers, a rush to keep up with the ever-changing business demands, and a rush to keep our business thriving. And as we go back to fully reopening our branches and hopefully get back to our lives post-pandemic, there's going to be a rush for our customers, and that means more and more data. So Tableau revolutionized self-service analytics. We empowered business users to ask questions and get answers from any data, anywhere. And this was an amazing leap forward. But we're not just about self-service. We're about self-service with governance. We want to empower IT with this control and visibility and reduce the effort to get there. It's not an either or, it's an and. And one of the problems we see our customers struggling with today is that, well, IT and dashboard builders are investing hundreds of hours building and documenting all these great, rich data environments, very curated. Then you go over into the self-service world and you lose all of that visibility because business users either, well, first, they don't necessarily have access to the IT systems, and if they do, they're not likely to break out of their workflow or their mindset to discover them. Or B, they dump all that data into Excel, you know they do, and create this ungoverned chaos. And so, poof, it's a huge loss because all the thinking the business is doing, combining great data sets, defining KPIs, identifying filters and groups to help them achieve their top-line goals, well, that's all lost. And IT can't see it. And so you have this big chasm between IT and the business. Now, I know we've seen all these numbers before, but it's true. Insight-driven companies or reimagined companies, they're leading the pack. This means that your competition is working to lead the pack and help new customers as their needs arrive faster. I don't want to go through all of these, but I know that you've seen some of them before, where insight-driven companies are 23 times more likely to add customers or even 7 times faster growth than the global GDP. Now, I know all of you can do this as well. All right, so back to our story. So with the business users creating their own content and IT struggling to understand what the business needs, we go back to this chasm. Now, with Tableau lowering the barrier for business users to explore data and play with data, we started to see a new pattern emerge. Business users could come up with the views they needed, and IT could look at what they did and understand what was needed to support that analysis from a technical perspective. And so, Tableau Data Management was born. When we saw that we could leverage all of the work that the end users did and allow IT and data engineers to build upon that and then share new data definitions with business users and create this bridge between these audiences, a new synergy was created. Okay, so how is Tableau Data Management helping our customers today? First, we deliver self-service data management where data management evolves as the users start using that data in new anticipated and unanticipated ways. So we provide IT with all the information about how the business users use that data. I mean, the lineage is available right there, showing how data moves from source to the dashboard or the viz, whether it was transformed and how many people use it. And you can also do impact analysis. So if you have to make changes to the data, you know what is affected. You know who will be impacted and you know who to connect with. And at the same time, we enable IT to communicate with their users with things like data quality warnings, the ability to certify data and maybe set some boundaries so that their users have the confidence they're using the right data. It's an and proposition, not an either or. Now, second, and this item is really important, with that bridge approach that we're building, the business users are empowered with understanding. Our analytics catalog comes to them with the tools they use. So how many times has a business user looked and asked, what's the definition of those fields or terms? What does it mean? And the obvious response is, and then maybe our best response is, go to your wiki or your enterprise catalog and track it down, right? Imagine the time lost or the incorrect decision that was made because of a lack of understanding. So we enable an organization to put this great metadata in the context where the users are. This is called Tableau Catalog. We're not an enterprise data catalog, we're an analytics catalog, and we bring that great enterprise data right directly in context for the users. Now let's talk about a couple of customers before we continue on. So just a quick data point here. We need good, confident data for our business users, and we need IT to operationalize as much of the heavy lift as possible so that we have that synergy I spoke about earlier. One such success story, Charles Schwab, utilizing the Tableau data platform as they are driving the reopening of their branches and helping their customers along the way. So they gave great data to 140 branch managers and 1,200 financial consultants to allow them to track performance and customize their client offerings. You can find this and other solutions on our website, tableau.com/solutions. I want to talk about one more customer, PwC. So another area that we see up and coming is infusing AI with all of that synergistic data that we've been speaking about. Here's one example of how PwC deployed Tableau CRM, formerly known as Einstein. They had some really specific sales processes where they needed to drive efficiency. So what was the business challenge? In the last year and a half, PwC has taken their analytics strategy out of the hands of IT and multiple tech stacks and into the hands of business users in one consolidated platform. Now, PwC has taken the next step and advanced their Tableau CRM usage with something called Einstein Discovery. So with this artificial intelligence on their side, PwC sought to do a couple things. First, optimize their opportunity scores, win rates, and their time to close. And second, identify white space in the Sales Cloud adoption. And third, minimize account reps' time spent on each account page and account information, right? And so what were the results? When the Einstein Discovery pilot began, the data showed exceptionally high win rates. Noticing this trend, PwC realized that the win rate itself actually wasn't the problem, but the data that was being used as the input. Well, for Sales Cloud, was missing data. Therefore, Einstein Discovery not only gave insights on how to improve win rate, it identified key gaps in Sales Cloud adoption for the team to optimize and eventually benefit all that discovery output. And with Tableau CRM, it's easy for employees to do advanced reporting with Salesforce and non-Salesforce data. In addition, now PwC has the ability to drill down in campaigns, goals, and global relationships. There's a nice little quote there on top that says, "Our US dashboards are a nice blend of art and science," says Ryan Randazza, the director. For so long, all we focused on was a number. Now we aren't looking at numbers, we're looking at trends. It's a nice story. Okay, as we wrap up here, I had a couple of key takeaways for you. And I know we covered a lot of topics and material today, so I'd like to touch base on 3 key takeaways before I close out. First, companies that succeed actively look for ways to get data into more parts of their organization. Building a data culture and democratizing data is a choice. It doesn't just happen. And you are going to have to focus on dismantling technical barriers and, more importantly, organizational barriers so that you build self-confident data skills in all areas of the business and improve time to insight. Second, self-service empowerment is a critical success factor. If all insights need to be created by a central IT function, then you just won't achieve the speed to insight and agility that you need in a crisis to continually sense change and respond with agility. And third, to speed up time insight, you need to deliver an integrated experience that joins up the way you manage and trust how your users explore and analyze data into one self-service workflow. Finally, many users won't just use data unless you bring analytics to the applications where they work. But when you do, you make the whole organization smarter and more efficient. All of these capabilities help our customers to transform from legacy models where only 20% of the people use data to that data-driven business we spoke about earlier. That's what we mean when we say our mission is to help people see and understand their data and their metadata. And this is why this is a part of every digital transformation. Okay, so I look forward to chatting with you at either the Q&A session or the roundtable. Have a great day.
Mark, thanks so much. Great to hear some real use cases there. Very refreshing and totally relevant. With this crowd, we often don't get to see the end use cases. We talk about fundamental, sort of foundational stuff, and it's always great to sort of go out to the sort of final mile or final kilometer, if you will, to see the data actually getting to the end user. I think that's a great value there. I'd like to welcome Darren McGarren as well, Principal Solutions Engineer at Tableau. Welcome, Darren. If you can hear us, yeah, you're on mute maybe. I'm struggling to hear you. So anyway, while you sort that out, let's have a look. We've got a couple of questions come in from the Slido. I certainly picked up early on in your presentation, Mark, the cultural difference between business and IT, and I think that also applies to sort of data generally. What advice do you have for breaking down barriers and building a data culture from your travels and your interaction with clients?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you. I'm struggling to hear Darren.
Okay.
In a second.
Darren, you there?
Can you hear me?
Ah, there we go.
There we go. Great.
Yeah, I think that's a great question about breaking down those barriers. And I think, it's having the groups simply come together and work together on similar challenges. So, for example, if IT were to simply come to the business unit and sit down and have a discussion about business requirements, let's say they come to the finance group and IT says, hey, give us all your business requirements for what you need for when it comes to reporting or managing your data. And they'll just give them a ton of different things that they want. And then if IT goes back and just puts, engineers data and puts that data together, ETL and all that work behind the scenes, that the two are never going to really see eye to eye. That whole process of, finance is going to want to see it this way by that way, and maybe turn it a little bit this way and look at it differently and add some other data. So to me, I think the data culture is when you bring the two groups together and you allow self-service in the business unit to continue and do its job, but with the governance side and having IT work together with them to bring those synergies together. I mean, that's where we see the data culture shifts in an organization, and they work towards actionable insights as opposed to just looking at dashboards, and not, just looking at yesterday's news. It's better to have them look at today's stuff and what's going to happen maybe in the future. So Darren, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but.
Yeah, I think, we kind of think about this a little bit also along the lines of what Mark is saying, like there's a chasm in an organization, and a lot of times both sides don't fully appreciate the value that each side brings. And I think when you look and you bring this information to the end users, and then they look at this and go, wow, this is great, this is trusted, I know what it is, I see the value. From an IT organizational point of view, when they're looking and they can get a holistic view, like they can see where their data is flowing to, they can see the dashboards or the analytics that's been kind of coming out of it, the impact of the work, it closes that chasm and it brings both of them together. So I kind of think about, we kind of talk a lot about this as kind of metadata, but it's really just data. And any scenario where you're actually sharing data and people are coming together and working together, sharing data, I think you're going to close that chasm, and you're going to have the same effects that you have when, traditionally in the past, we had the kind of ivory tower of people doing analytics and end users were just consumers. End users now doing the analytics has closed that chasm and brought great value to organizations. It's the same thing here. Being able to close that chasm is really bringing great value to organizations.
Very good. We've been working on a couple of projects with clients where they've looked at, getting some early wins that gain credibility as they build out end user applications. And what they found, I think one of the clients they were mentioning built something with a scope of 40 users and ended up with something like 400, just because the word of mouth got out there. And that did a great job of helping to both sides of the equation to understand, the value of what they were doing and, how to work together better. Again, more cultural. Is that something that you see?
Absolutely. And I think the other side of that is aiming for progress versus perfection is part of this too. And for anyone who's done this and listening to people talking earlier on, this is a job that never ends. The data world and the platforms, they're evolving, and we can all look back 5 years and think about what was big back then, and talk back 10 years what was big, and what will be big in the future is going to change. So it's always going to be a continuum and a longer journey. So having teams coming together, producing something, if it may not be 100%, but it's 80%. Let's iterate to that 85%. And lo and behold, you may not get to the 90 because you scrap it, because now you got to do something else. So you just have to have an agile environment that supports that level, both from the kind of data management IT side of you and the consumption side of things.
Very good. Funny you mentioned 80-90%, because that's aspirational, it seems, for some of our audience here. The next question, we spend so much time on data preparation for analytics. How can we move from 20% data usage to 80%? So any words of advice?
Sure, keep going, Darren. I think you're doing great.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of times, I think there's a certain aspect of quantity involved in all of this too. It's like, well, I've got all this data. Is everybody using everything all the time? But some of this is kind of looking at this and understanding, are people getting the information they need at the right time? You may just need to have a certain piece of data flowing to you for a very small moment in time, but it could be critical. But understanding where that's being used and making that available and having that in place is I think, as big as like kind of raw numbers, about 80-90% is probably less important than the satisfaction of end users and they're able to make decisions. It's kind of the way you think about it is, I think about it, I think, and we think about it is, if data is flowing in the organization, it'll be there when people need it. And our job is to make it as easy as possible for people to get the right data so that they can make decisions, so that if they needed to, they've got the standard source of truth. But the reality is that we're always looking to augment it with other data coming in, and being able to do that is easy. Like maybe you bring in another piece of data and we look at that, and maybe that data is operationalized, or maybe it's never used again. The temporalness of the data doesn't really kind of have an effect or a ratio to the value. It can be really valuable at a very, very short period of time, and we have to kind of think about that from an end user point of view.
And, I'll add to that a little bit too, and thinking about where we see, customers that Darren and I work with are those customers that move from a report type factory, where feature functionality goes into a group that then analyzes that, builds it, and then sends it out to the group. And it might be a couple of weeks before it makes it out. Hopefully it's not. Hopefully it's more agile today. But in those report factory situations, A, it might not be what the user really wants, or B, it's just too old by the time they get to it. So where we're seeing customers shift more to using 80-90% of that data are ones where it's truly a self-service, agile environment where IT, their job is to curate and create fantastic data. And then on the business side, they're able to take advantage of that data right then on the spot and play with their data, have fun with their data. Tableau makes it really fun to play and look at data and explore that data. So that's what we've given kind of into the hands of the people, is to allow them to actually have fun with data and allow everyone to kind of have that data champion moment where they have their aha moment and help their business unit. So.
Very good. Okay. Well, I think we're a little over time, so I'm going to wrap things up now. Guys, appreciate it. Thanks for giving your insights today. Great examples. Really enjoyed the presentation, Mark. And thanks, Darren, for chipping in there. Appreciate it.
All right.
Cheers.
Thank you for having
us. Have a great day.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
guys. Okay. Well, we've come to the end of our first day on this data management summit. I would just won't dwell on it too long, but I'd just like to thank our sponsors and speakers once again. Sponsors: Anna Alveo Alatus, Bureau van Dijk, QSIP Global Services and Derivative Service Bureau, Ivera, Solidatus, Quantexa, Six, Tableau, and West Highland. We are back tomorrow at the same time. That is 9 a.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. British summertime, although it is a little chilly here in London. If you've missed any sessions from today, they are available on demand for a limited time. So you can go and hunt those out through the website. And without further ado, I'll just say goodbye for today. Hope you've enjoyed the show, and see you bright and early for more tomorrow. Thank you. Goodbye.